Queen's Ghost, Book 5 in the Queen's Wraith series. Written by G.K. Lund. Chapter 1. The grass hadn't been mowed in weeks. It flowed around Nadia Navarra's feet where she walked slowly through it. Far off, past the overly grassy field, grew trees and bushes, bright green against the blue morning sky. The air was clean and the pleasant sound of the breeze through the canopies was soothing. All in all, this guard duty was far more peaceful than doing it in the shade, the psychologically terrorizing borderlands on the outskirts of the underground city of Agartha. Fallen Oaks, a small town in the Earthside realm, seemed the complete opposite of the shade, both in tranquility and threats. Not that there were none. They were merely different from what she was used to. The sound of an engine broke through the calm, and Nadia adjusted the lanyard hanging around her neck to make sure the information on the keycard there was easy to see for anyone. She was dressed in dark pants, a simple sweater, and a slightly baggy jacket to be able to conceal her dagger and silver knife. Her sword remained inside the school building behind her. Such weapons got Earthsiders both scared and too curious. It was all about trying to blend in these days. Nadia sighed and then saw the white panel van appear on the road leading out from among the trees further ahead. She quickly scanned the license plate and relaxed when she recognized it. The driver slowed down when he reached her and came to a stop, though he didn't kill the engine. "Hi there, Nadia. Guard duty again?" Varric, a day-walking vampire and a former target of Nadia, asked. He was a young and lean man with dark, curly hair, and he offered her a friendly smile. "Guard duty again," she confirmed, voice neutral. It was getting difficult. She wished she could be back home, but as a newly appointed ghost for the Queen of Agartha, her place was now where the ghosts saw fit. "I'm sure they're planning something," Varric said. "They have to return at some point." "Yes, but not soon enough for Nadia's taste. What's that you have in the back there today? More supplies?" "Yes, mostly food. Some clothes." Nadia nodded and stepped back. "Don't let them wait." Varric drove off toward the abandoned school building Nadia was part of guarding. It lay on the outskirts of the town of Fallen Oaks and had been closed down 6 years ago, mostly because of large amounts of mold in the walls and findings of asbestos up under the attic ceiling. Thankfully, that did not apply to the entire building, which consisted of 3 larger sections. One of them had survived fairly unscathed and now housed the Queen of Agartha, her Queen's Guard the ghosts, or what remained of them, and those of her courtiers who had been dragged into the throne room about a week ago when the city had been attacked. Nadia watched Varric drive to the back entrance of the building they all stayed in to avoid being visible from the road should anyone pass by. Few did. This place had drawn people only when it operated as a school, and the new one lay across town, closer to the buildings there than the old school had. It had come as a shock to most that Count Elisatra's son lived there, but the even bigger shock was his daywalker status. That could not be hidden because the ghosts would have caught on to the signs, few as they were on this side of the veil. But Varric had been well situated here with the wealth his father had provided him after Nadia helped him leave Agartha, and therefore in a position to help the Queen and her retinue. The shock had soon given way to acceptance. Nadia hadn't even been scolded for her actions. There were simply too many serious matters at hand to make any fuss over a harmless daywalker. Those serious matters were not the tediousness of guard duty, though. Nadia was used to tediousness. That wasn't new. She had techniques to cope with it. But now, knowing that Agartha was occupied by Kassemyr and his army of were-vamp hybrids and that Nilafar was trapped in that place, she desperately wished she was there. It wasn't something she would have done in Agartha, but here, in the warm and verdant field outside the abandoned school, she fished the cell phone she'd acquired a few days ago out of her pocket and called the only number in there. Nikolai answered on the second ring. "Nadia, something wrong?" Nadia smiled a little. Does something have to be wrong for me to contact you? There was a pause on the other end. No, but considering the circumstances, nothing is wrong except for our current exile. All right, good. I just wanted to check in with you, to see if you're doing well. There's been so much with the practical things here lately. I never really got around to asking beyond the most basic questions. Everyone who'd fled from Agartha had spent time getting some affairs in order if they could. Everyone working together, court politics set aside in an astounding feat, according to Victoria. Nadia had reached her brother, who lived on another continent, with a borrowed phone, and through the wonders of Earthside technology, she now had literal money in her pocket and new clothes back in the school. What she currently wore was a costume to her and her kind. We're all right here, Nikolai said. Axel's at work and Nell's in the after-school program now. And you? I'm at work too. I'll be done soon. Nadia knew better than to ask for specifics. She wouldn't understand them. Nikolai had always been fascinated by Earthside technology and had left Agartha for this realm the moment he could. She had made sure he could by joining the Queen's Wraiths so he wouldn't stay behind for her. It had been the best solution all around, especially since she had wanted to join them. That is to say, she had dreamed of joining the ghosts, but they didn't let just anyone in. Now, though, she had arrived at the final destination in that regard. She sighed. Everything all right? Nikolai asked, making her realize she'd sighed audibly. Yes, it's only the waiting. You're still worried about Nilafar? Yes. I haven't heard anything since the last message got through, but she'll be fine. She knows to keep her head down. I know. She did. Nikolai did have a job as some kind of data analyst or whatever he called it, but he also had a side business of helping people who moved between realms to settle in this one. Trade had been halted when Kassemyr took over the city, but when it had resumed a few days later, Nikolai had gotten a message through to Nilafar, so she knew where Nadia had ended up after the explosions and attacks on Kalmont Hollow. Tell me what Nell is doing today instead, she told her brother, and he did. It was, despite the desperate situation they were in, a rare luxury to be able to talk to him like that and hear of the everyday normal things her daughter took part in. Simply picking up the phone and calling him wasn't something she could do in Agartha. And that's the last I heard about the stained indigo shoe debacle, Nikolai finished with exasperation in his voice on the other end. Not really a problem compared to your situation, I know. Nadia smiled and gave Varric a quick wave when he came driving the other way, back toward town. For a little girl not living in a city overtaken by merciless beasts, I believe that would be a problem. You have no idea how thankful I am that she doesn't have to worry about more than such things, Nick. Yes, well, I suppose she learned a lesson about proper footwear in the forest. They chatted some more and then ended the call. Nadia would call back later when her daughter was home and talk to her too. At the moment, she was so thrilled about these calls, but she suspected it wouldn't take long before she'd want more and more. Living in Agartha and hiding their connection for all these years had almost been easier. Now, her daughter was no longer a secret, but Nell's father was. Nadia had only revealed that particular truth to Harmiston in a moment of exhaustion and agitation. That connection could never be revealed to anyone. Nadia truly feared what Darrow would do if he found out. He wasn't in his right mind. That mind had been broken years ago. A snap of a twig sounded from among the trees. Nadia shoved her phone into her pocket and began walking over to check it out. I'm telling you, a young voice said. I saw lights on there last night. Nadia stopped herself from rolling her eyes. This wasn't the first time people, especially young ones, had been drawn here because of their curiosity. Who's that lady? Another said. They were only speaking in half-hushed tones. Nadia's half-werewolf senses, which were dulled in the non-magical Earthside realm, weren't really needed to hear these two. You there, she said, not even bothering to sneak up on them. 2 gangly teenage boys drew together and pressed against a tree at her approach. "What are you doing here?" she asked them, her tone of voice demanding answers and getting them. The boys didn't have much of an attitude, like the last 3 boys had. Still, Earthsiders weren't really a match for someone who was used to protecting people from creatures only seen in movies and people's nightmares in this place. What's going on in there?" one of the boys asked, pointing beyond the nearest trees, which didn't hide the old school from sight. "Mold sanitation." "What?" the other boy gaped. "Mold sanitation," Nadia repeated and held up the fake badge they'd had made. The thing about the courtiers was that most of them had businesses and traded Earthside. Because of this, money had been procured fast, and they had paid off a couple of key figures in Fallen Oaks who could confirm that, yes, the activity at the old school was to do with the toxic situation there. "We are removing the toxic mold and then the asbestos. I suggest you find somewhere else to hang out until this is done." That's a weird accent, lady. Where are you from?" Nadia refused to sigh in front of someone twice in the same day. "Not from here," she said, and stared them down. The boys shifted a little, but then didn't see any point in arguing with her. She watched them go, not letting them out of her sight before she was sure they didn't try to circumvent her. That would only lead them into contact with another ghost, but she could at least spare her new comrades the hassle. When she was satisfied, she walked back toward the open field to wait out the remainder of her shift. It truly was a peaceful place to keep watch, but as she walked back onto the overgrown and grassy field, she looked down at the lanyard around her neck and sighed, only for herself to hear. "I miss my sword," she mumbled. Chapter 2. The feeling of shedding skin was prevalent as ever. Nadia looked down at the frumpy Earthside clothes she wore on guard duty outside to avoid drawing attention. Having trained and worked as a wraith for most of her life, she kept the grimace inside but felt it nonetheless. Inside the school, safe from prying and curious eyes, they could all act and appear as true Agarthans. Nadia tied her long, dark hair into a braid and fastened it with an elastic band. She was more at ease now, dressed in her usual clothes of tight-fitted yet slightly elastic pants, comfortable ankle-high boots, a shirt and a tight-fitted sleeveless top over it, equipped with pockets and small straps to keep the equipment she needed to carry despite her weapons. These clothes were easy to move in and provided some protection while on the go. She didn't have the sense of being in motion anymore, though. Except for training sessions with the ghosts, which she did find challenging and useful, her days in Fallen Oaks had been stagnant. A few ghosts had ventured back to Agartha. She knew from their intelligence reports that life in the city was not still standing. People had gone back to their daily lives, so to speak, but under a strict and violent rule, left to the devices of the often out-of-control hybrids. Hybrids that had been created by Kassemyr vampire and new leader, not only of the vampires of Agartha, but the whole city. Nadia reached for her coat, which lay slung over a desk. She'd managed to snag a tiny classroom all to herself. She didn't think many students had been taught here at a time. It had room for no more than 4, 5 tops, plus a teacher. The coat was a deep and dark blue, easy to hide in the shadows with, but definitely not the dark coat of a wraith. It was made from the same thin fabric, though, interwoven with wool, and therefore felt familiar to her. It had been a gift from the Queen on one of their worst days. The coat had belonged to a man of the ghosts who had fallen so everyone else could flee the hybrids chasing them. There had been a bloodstain and a small hole at the back of it at the time. The Queen was a regent in exile and had had no other coat to give. It had belonged to a man larger than Nadia, though, and she had needed to mend it anyway. The stain was now cut off, and the back and shoulders sewn in, so the garment fit her perfectly. The color was still something to get used to, but the feel wasn't. A knock on the door had her turn, But Victoria, dressed in simple pants and shirt, her chestnut hair in a loose bun, marched inside the room before she could answer. "Hey, Nad. I hoped I would catch you before your watch starts." "I've got some time yet," Nadia said, and nodded toward the door. Victoria joined her, and they walked through the various hallways of the abandoned school, only seeing the exiled courtiers of a far-off court now and then. "Have you heard anything?" Victoria asked her. "About what?" "About our return? I'm just a sentinel ghost, a bodyguard, not a counselor." The ghosts operated with fewer ranks than the wraiths did, simply because they had fewer duties. They guarded the Regent of Agartha and his or her children. That was it. So they had the cutter ghosts, the rookies who were usually older than the bolt wraiths, since the ghosts recruited at leisure. There were always around 80 to 120 ghosts of all ranks at any given time. Less now after the attack on the city. Above the cutters came the sentinels who made up the main body of the force. They were the bodyguards of the Queen. Above them was the phantom ghost, the leader who tended to practicalities like the rosters and assigning duties. The ghosts had no equivalent of the shadow or blade wraiths. They didn't need them. Above the phantom was the Queen, their direct leader. "Yes," Victoria agreed to her statement, "but the sentinels are everywhere the Queen goes. You hear everything." "I haven't heard anything that hasn't been told to all," Nadia said. "I promise, Victoria, I'm not holding back." She could see her friend's shoulders sag. "I know you wish to go back, but all I know right now is that Agartha isn't a safe place to return to." "We're wasting time here," Victoria said. "There are so many I don't know what happened to." "I know. The wraiths, too." Nadia only nodded. She had no idea what had happened to them. She only knew they had been removed from the cube after the attack, which had rendered them unconscious and helpless. Victoria worried about them, too. Many of them were her friends from childhood. "I promise I'll tell you anything I can, but I am not privy to anything special that others can't hear. I want to return as much as you do." Victoria nodded her understanding, and they separated at the entrance to the large gym, which had become an assembly hall of sorts. It was where there was enough room to gather everyone. Nadia still had a few minutes to spare and decided to head down the hallway she was in. 2 minutes later, she found the science lab, presently occupied by the Cube Chronicler, and their only housemage at the moment. Educated as she was in Earthside knowledge, she saw the irony in a mage running a science lab. But Harmiston was many contradictory things these days, it seemed. He was busy in there, working with the books he'd acquired and all kinds of fluids in test tubes and beakers. Add the magical artifacts, and Nadia might just have thought she'd walked into his lab in the cube. The thought of those visits left a tightening in Nadia's chest. She'd tried to keep Harmiston at bay, afraid for his safety if she let him into her life, but those visits had brought her joy and confusion. Like now, when she wrinkled her nose at something green that bubbled in its test tube above an open flame. "Harmiston," she said to get his attention. The man had his nose in a book, seemingly neglecting the bubbling concoction. Harmiston, with his short blonde hair and close-cropped beard, looked up and blinked before he focused fully on her and smiled. At least she hadn't made him jump this time. "Interesting book?" "Oh, yes. It is a most interesting treatise on airborne poisons. I mean, I liken it to a thesis, but it is a chapter, really, written for young pupils. Teenagers, I guess. Still, it is a nice, quick refresher." Nadia smiled and then indicated the test tube, which at that moment began boiling over. "Oh no!" Harmiston exclaimed, and dropped the book. He ran toward the mess and managed to douse the flame and remove the test tube. "That was not my intent." "And your intent was?" "To see what reactions the fumes might cause." He trailed off and looked like he was about to vomit. Harmiston wisely stepped away and opened a window to air out the room. "I suppose that answers that." And from this, you learned, Nadia prompted, that toxins and poisons do spread in different ways. Harmiston took a deep breath of fresh air and turned back to face her again. They can be airborne, ingested, given through inoculation. Yes, I believe we all know this. During her tenure as a Wraith, Nadia had been an assassin in all but name. But there was something strange about whatever poison that took out the Wraiths and the palace. Air. Harmiston nodded and went back to his book. It was a coordinated attack in buildings with open doors and windows, yet everyone inside was rendered immobile and helpless. I suppose there is only the obvious solution, Nadia said. Yes? Magic. You would know, wouldn't you? Harmiston winced. Nadia, I'm sorry. No, we've been over that. We have more pressing matters, and your knowledge of the ways of mages is useful. Knowledge and knowledge. I'm self-taught. He gave her a diffident smile. That's more than the rest of us. Nadia looked around the lab, not understanding half his experiments and tests. Don't sell yourself short. Can't do much in this realm anyway. Yes, well, at least that burnt concoction doesn't assault the nose so badly. Harmiston smiled a warm smile then. How's your little friend then? The Anemoy newt? He nodded. Nadia reached for the amulet she carried around her neck, hidden inside her shirt. The little lizard inside, which would mask all her sounds, except her voice when awakened, lay dormant, like he had since they'd arrived in Fallen Oaks. With no magic to speak of, the little creature seemed to have shrunk and gone into some kind of hibernation on this side of the veil. He sleeps soundly still. I assume he'll be up and running once we're back home. If that ever happens, Nadia said. She knew it had only been a week, but she was used to acting, not waiting far away from the enemy. Wraiths hunted and stalked their prey. They could wait, oh yes, but always while on the trail of their target. This was not the same. I thought ghosts, were patient types. They both are, she said, and silenced his next question with a raised eyebrow. Harmiston lowered his inquisitive one, and then took the book and carried it over to another workstation where he had already placed several bottles of liquids and a few jars with powders in them. Nadia moved a little to the side to keep the same amount of space between them. Harmiston, despite his chattering ways, had become quite the mystery to her. Getting too close was still a risk, but a different one now. Are you sure we're all right? He asked her, noting her distance. They'd talked now and then over the last week, but with her guard duties and his work here, there hadn't been much of it. Not once had they shared a kiss or a touch. She wasn't sure if she missed it. Yes, she told him nonetheless. I meant what I said, Nad, he told her, and put the book down on the table's surface. I will never tell anyone about your child. Her breath hitched at the mention of her daughter from anyone but Victoria. For so long, no one had known. It had to be that way. Her instinct was to protect her child, not talk openly about her. I am grateful for that. So? He prompted. So? She merely repeated, not seeing what he wanted. Boy or girl? Nadia hesitated. She couldn't help it. They hadn't talked about this since the day they arrived in Fallen Oaks. I told you before, you don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to, Harmiston said. He stood still, a few tables separating them. He did nothing to make her uncomfortable. He never did. And besides, this secret was now a semi-secret among the few who knew. Of course, Harmiston knew more than most. He knew her daughter's true parentage. That was more than the Queen knew. And it was dangerous information. A girl, she found herself saying after a few beats. She looked him right in the eyes, but there was nothing but warmth and kind curiosity there. She could see that he didn't want to know to be able to use it against her. He simply wanted to know because he wanted to learn about her. A girl? Harmiston added a broad smile to his handsome face. A mini version of you, then. A nicer version of me. He laughed at that. What's her name? Nadia hesitated again. She felt no compulsion to tell him. She simply did it anyway. It was strange having someone to talk to about her daughter except Victoria, and they had always done it while watching out for prying ears. Nell. That's a lovely name. It's short for Nilafar. That's an unusual name. An Earthside name, I think. Yes, I named her for her grandmother. They both eyed each other for a second. Then came the question which surprised her the least. How old is she? He knew Darrow was the father, and that he'd only returned to Agartha a few months ago. These were not recent happenings. 9. Oh, Nadia, he said. You astound me. Why? 9 years? That is... I don't know how you kept it secret for so long among the wraiths of all people. If I didn't know any better, which I do now, I would have said it was impossible a week ago. He shook his head in bewilderment. How did you manage? Nadia shrugged. She's my daughter. She matters most. I had to manage. That had never been a question. Yes, I suppose you did. Darrow was turned shortly after I got pregnant. I couldn't risk him taking her from me. She's almost a full-blooded werewolf. What if he, in his madness, had turned her? There lay more to Nadia's words than the explanation she gave, and Harmiston was many things, but not slow. That's understandable. I told you this when we passed through the veil, and I'll say it again. I will not reveal what you've told me to anyone. She didn't have much choice but to believe him, and found he gave her no reason to disbelieve him. Besides, he was safe from Darrow, too, here, away from Agartha, just like her Nell. Good, She stopped talking and focused on the soft footfalls that hit the ground somewhere outside. Her hearing was not at its best in this realm, but it was still better than most. Harmiston reacted to her gaze toward the window before he heard something himself. What is it? Several people running at a brisk jog. They both went over to the open window. With no shouts of warning, she didn't think it a threat, nor was it, from what she could deduce when 20 ghosts came running into view. Nadia could see they were led by the 2 that had gone back to Agartha last night on a reconnaissance job. The 3rd ghost to leave was nowhere to be seen. The other 18 were new. There had been a few ghosts who'd joined the Queen's ranks in Fallen Oak since the attack, but it took time for them to track down where everyone had gone. With these newcomers, the ghosts were a bit over 80 altogether. Looks like they found some backup in the city, she told Harmiston. We need all the help we can get. Yes, and on that note, I have guard duty now, she said, and turned to leave, hurrying to reach the gym to hear what was happening. Chapter 3. The school gym was teeming with people. That had become ordinary in this unordinary situation. This was where the Queen and her courtiers socialized, discussed business, and everything that was going on regarding Agartha. Queen Isona and her closest advisors had set up a long table and chairs at one end of the large space, while the rest of the floor was mostly open except some chairs spread out for people to sit on in groups. The ghosts lined the walls, a few of them always keeping watch in there since that was where the Queen was. However, they also functioned as her eyes and ears, and remained on watch in a lesser capacity to keep an eye on things when she retired for the evenings. Upon entering this open space, Nadia noticed the calm in there. She was met with the usual buzz of voices and soft footfalls against the hard floor. I was beginning to think you might be late, Sentinel, Marika said. The dark-haired phantom ghost, clad from top to toe in their deep blue, allowed half a closed-mouth smile. It was as much of a hearty greeting as any ghost or wraith would ever give, and that kind of tardiness would have surprised me in a former wraith. Don't understand the meaning of the word, phantom, she told the ghost. You'll relieve aid, Marika told her. Nadia nodded her understanding. Is there any news on the reconnaissance? All in due time, Nadia, Marika told her, and not for the first time. We all have our duties to tend to. Nadia didn't argue and went over to take Aid's place. The young woman dipped her chin when she approached, and Nadia stood next to the wall at the side of the gym in the middle of the room. All in all, they were 10 ghosts in there, starting their new shifts, 3 on the long walls, 2 on the shorter ones. For the next 4 hours, this was to be Nadia's place. No, there was no point in discussing her orders. She knew that. Even wraiths didn't do that. But she had come to realize that the lives of the wraiths consisted of being on the move a lot more than the ghosts. There was no stand-to-attention guard duty in the shade or while hunting rogue beasts and criminals. The wraiths had more freedom to make active decisions and choices than the ghosts, simply because their duty depended on it. The ghosts, on the other hand, had the honor of guarding the regent of Agartha, which meant watching her like hawks and never leaving her side. It had become quite the adjustment, especially when she felt she could be of more use in Agartha than in Fallen Oaks. Nadia was used to moving covertly and unseen through the city. Then again, she had to admit that so were her new comrades. Today was the first time she'd seen one of them not return. The commotion began 2 minutes after she'd taken up her post. At least she would be able to hear the latest news. Voices were raised when the large group of ghosts entered the gym after having met the last sentinel on guard duty outside near the entrance. Marika, who'd left the room after talking to Nadia, came right back inside along with them. Calm down, everybody, a female voice broke through the now crowded and noisy gym. Queen Aesona stood next to the long table, but couldn't be seen by everyone. They had not opted for prioritizing a high seat in this place. They had other things to worry about. Nadia could see her through the people gathered near her, though. Aesona had pulled back her blonde and slightly graying hair in a tightly braided bun and wore earthside clothing with black, wide pants and a white blouse. Let's hear it. The queen went on when the courtiers' voices died down. We sent 3 ghosts back to Agartha last night, and now 20 returns? Ma'am, one of the ghosts, Carrie, a tall and blonde man, said. We were 3, and of the 3 of us, 2 return. The rest we encountered in the tunnels under the cube. Nadia kept her face and stance neutral. She'd been taught years ago how to remain motionless on her post for hours. That was no challenge to her. But hearing that the ghosts had been using the tunnels under the cube, regardless of the situation in the city, disturbed her. According to Harmiston, they had always known about the tunnels, yet rarely used them. It seemed like that time was over. Elaborate, please, the queen said. Carrie looked to Marika, who gave a subtle nod. It was better that one spoke instead of all of them. They had survived the attack of the hybrids, but woke up in our various, yes? The queen prompted and rolled her hand to get him to move on. Nadia had received some information about the inner workings of the ghosts now that she had been accepted as one of them, and she suspected he meant the various secret hiding places around the palace where the ghosts kept watch. Darrow and his followers wouldn't necessarily have found them there despite their heightened senses. They have been looking for us for days. It was only luck that we met today. We continued the search of the tunnels and ended up under the cube. They had been searching those tunnels, which were numerous and difficult to get through, because they were guarded by the hybrids who had also uncovered them, thanks to the escape of the queen and everyone else now in Fallen Oaks. We stayed too long in one place, but there was little choice. A few vamps came upon us, and a couple of hybrids. Sentinel Silas fell, and we would have too, had not our fellow ghosts come across us right then. Sad and good news, then, Aesona said. True spoken. Her spymaster cut in and stood. He was an older man with shrewd eyes who seemed to see everything. Nadia had wondered over the past few weeks if he had once been a ghost. They seemed to reach beyond the blue-clad guards. A few of the courtiers closest to the queen fought much like them. They also often recruited from the court. With the right talent and skills, anyone could be accepted into the ranks of the ghosts. But unlike the wraiths who recruited among ordinary people and let many try, the ghosts didn't. There were fewer of them, and many of those, as Nadia had come to understand, were related to the courtiers in some form. Many ghosts were the offspring of noble parents born outside marriages. This was not a hindrance in anything but inheritances. Agarthans did not, as certain Earthside cultures, call such children illegitimate. They simply were legitimate in the eyes of the law. But for the nobility, only children born within a marriage could inherit titles and certain privileges. A noble-born parent could bestow monetary inheritances on all their children, though, regardless of how they came into the realm. Therefore, the pathway of the ghosts was a noble and honorable one, too. And just like among the wraiths, many of the ghosts were half-breeds. It seemed to be an honor among the noble-born parents to have children with enhanced senses and strengths who would join the ghosts, almost like an unspoken gift to their regent. Nadia had noticed the sense of urgent need to perform above and beyond among the ghosts. They all came from different walks of life, but that need was something she recognized from the wraiths, too. It was seldom pressure from parents that drove young bolts forward, but a need to keep up and prove themselves to each other, to earn everyone's respect and trust. A trust Nadia had now lost. She forced her mind off such straying thoughts, and back to the spy master who was talking loud enough for everyone to hear. Few things were kept hidden these days. "But I do believe something of note happened," the man was saying. "Why else would you have remained in one place too long?" "You're correct," Carrie told the spy master. "We did come upon something down there. It's why we stayed too long and were caught. We found a device of sorts. It might have had something to do with the attack that left everyone unconscious." The spy master looked at Marika, likely wanting to take such news to be discussed somewhere else. Almost everything was discussed openly these days. The queen beat him to it, though, clearly having little patience for this. "What was it?" "We're not sure, ma'am," Carrie said. The queen was a higher authority than the spy master, after all, and technically, the ghosts only answered to her. It was a large container with many tubes and instruments attached to it. It stood fairly hidden in an old tunnel beneath the cube. The thing about it was that it contained some remnants of, well, we don't know. Magic, maybe? There was a faint light to the few drops of liquid inside it. Nadia didn't move or react. Ghosts didn't do that. She'd learned that over the last week. They didn't act unless a threat to the queen forced their hands. Until then, they remained silent and ever watching. But this information from Carrie brought memories back. She'd seen a device like that inside Kassemyr's home, Jade Mansion. She hadn't known what it was then, and still didn't, yet was sure it was the same thing. But today was not the same day as the attack. Things had been chaotic and happening fast then. That had given all ghosts and one cast-out wraith room to talk openly in a gathering such as this. Today was, thankfully, not a chaotic day. Yet, while Nadia listened, she knew she had information they needed. Among the wraiths, regardless of rank, she could have approached her superiors and spoken up. The ghosts did not operate that way. "And this is not something the wraiths would have confiscated at some point?" the queen asked. "Perhaps, but they wouldn't have put it in the tunnels," Carrie said. "They didn't know about them," Marika joined in. Maybe it was the mention of the wraiths that had her glance over at Nadia. It didn't matter. Nadia chose that moment to use the silent and not to be taken advantage of. Code of the ghosts. Despite being supposed to stand still for her entire shift, she calmly raised her arms and closed her coat before releasing it again. She could feel the side stares from her fellow ghosts. They recognized the gesture. So did Marika. The look in her eyes was undecipherable, though it would have greatly surprised Nadia had it been otherwise. "I believe you are right," Marika told the spy master. "This is a matter best discussed in private until we have more information." "Let's meet in my office in a few minutes, then," the Queen said, seemingly unaware of the quiet signals that were sent inside the gym. Nadia remained on her post while the general chatter in the large room rose again and people began moving about. The Queen, her spy master, and a few of her other closest advisors left the gym. Nadia paid attention to Marika, who said a few words to the returned ghosts. They looked worn out from days in hiding and on the run. Still, when the phantom addressed one of them with a few soft-spoken words and indicated Nadia, the man went over to relieve her from her short shift. Nadia gave him a quick nod and turned her full focus on Marika, who simply turned and walked out of the gym. She revealed no strong emotions. What ghost would? But Nadia was certain her move was not a welcome one. Still, she followed, walking quickly and silently through the crowd which hardly noticed her. She answered to the Queen now, too. It wasn't like she could have kept silent. Chapter 4. "This had better not be about you wanting to return to Agartha," Marika said, her voice in a tight whisper. They were in one of the numerous hallways inside the school, standing next to a wall, trying to avoid anyone listening. "It's not, Phantom. I swear it." "Then I expect you to have pertinent information about that device." "I believe I do. I've seen it before." "Phantom, Sentinel," a voice interrupted. They turned their heads to see one of the Queen's advisors at the end of the hall. He waved them over. "You are new, Nadia," Marika continued while they walked down toward the door leading into the Queen's office. "But considering your years-long service to the Wraiths, I expect the same from you as from any ghost." "Understood." Marika watched her from the corner of her eye. "Make sure that you do." They walked into a reception area which led into several offices. This was where the Queen and her children had taken up residence while they were here. Nadia glimpsed Isona's daughters and son in one of the rooms, furnished with simple cots and the desks pushed against the wall before she and Marika entered the largest room. The sign on the door spelled out Principal Harris. "Phantom, Sentinel," the Queen greeted them. She sat behind the desk and was surrounded by 3 men and 2 women who both sat and stood. With so many in the room, it felt cramped despite its size. "Ma'am," Marika said. "You have information about this device?" "Sentinel Nadia does, ma'am." "Does this have something to do with the Wraiths, then?" Isona asked. "No," Nadia said. "I don't know why it would be placed under the cube, except for Kassemyr and his hybrids bringing it there." Which would mean that they'd known about the tunnels before the day of the attack. "How do you know about it, then?" Nadia hesitated for the briefest of moments, but she wasn't risking being thrown out of the cube anymore. "I saw something like it once before, inside Jade Mansion." "The home of Kassemyr Temedius?" the spy master asked. Nadia nodded. "I was following Darrow, Tricandis I mean, to try to ascertain what he was up to. He'd sought me out and I followed him, found out where he lived. That's how I figured out they were working together." "And you went inside the house of a hybrid?" Isona asked. "No, not at first. But a few weeks later I was tasked with tracking down some necros and necromancers. They were taken by Kassemyr and Tricandis and brought to Jade Mansion. I had little choice but to follow them inside then." "Necros," the spy master mused. "Yes, I remember reading something about that in some of the status reports from the Spectres." "Sounds like something out of ancient myths," Isona commented. "We thought this about the hybrids too, ma'am," Marika said. "Yes, we did. And what a mistake that was. So, Sentinel, you entered Jade Mansion then. You're still here with us, so you obviously made it out alive." "Yes, with one of the necromancers. The man who was later slain outside the cube by the second hybrid, Kamra." "If only there were no more than 2. Nadia agreed wholeheartedly, but didn't comment. "The device, then," Isona went on. "You saw it there?" "I did. It was just as Sentinel Carey described it back in the gym. I came upon it in what appeared to be a small lab inside the mansion. At first, I noticed nothing amiss, but then I lost consciousness. It happened so fast that I hardly registered it. I felt fine, but began stumbling." Isona lowered her brows in an unspoken question. "Neither wraiths nor ghosts stumble, ma'am," Marika explained. "It is only barely acceptable in battle, not during reconnaissance." A twitch caught the corner of the Queen's mouth. "Forgive my ignorance of your high standards, dear ghosts. Carry on, Sentinel." "There's not much more to tell, ma'am," Nadia said. "I didn't think much of it until Carey brought the news just now, but it would explain how all the wraiths and everyone in the palace were taken so fast. They had no time to react. I saw that myself by how they lay where they fell. No one did anything to alert anyone or try to get away." "And you didn't report any of this to the wraiths?" the spymaster asked. Nadia was standing straight, eyes on the Queen, and she kept her gaze there, though staring through the older woman. "No." "Why?" the man began, but the Queen silenced him with a quick gesture. "Is there anything else you know that's of importance?" she asked instead. "Perhaps. Tracandis attacked me with a smaller device once. It emitted the same type of light, sort of silvery. It left me blind for a few minutes." "And this was when?" the spymaster asked. "Does it matter? I didn't report this either." Nadia didn't see the point in holding back information, but she was beginning to wonder if she was going to walk out of this office cast out from the ranks of the ghosts, too. At least she would hold a record of leaving both the Queen's guards in less than 2 weeks. "So they have developed handheld weapons that work against those with limited tolerances of silver," one of the Queen's advisors said. Isona nodded at the woman and leaned forward, placing her forearms on the desk. "That means it should work against werewolves, vampires, and hybrids alike." "A most useful weapon," the spymaster agreed, though his eyes were still on Nadia. "But how can we trust her word when the wraiths couldn't?" "I never willfully led any wraith into danger," Nadia said. "I was loyal, even after they cast me out." "And yet you never divulged this information to them." "No." "Care to tell us why?" "No." This was it then, Nadia thought. She could not tell these people the whole truth. "That makes you untrustworthy, Sentinel." The spymaster's emphasis on her new title was not lost on her. She stood on shaky ground now. "Why did you not tell the wraiths about your dealings and encounters with Tracandis?" the man persisted. Nadia remained quiet, feeling every pair of eyes in the room on her. Clearly, she cannot be trusted. "I trust her." The office suddenly fell quiet, as if they were all holding their breath. All eyes turned to the Queen, who had her eyes on the hilt of Nadia's sword. She hadn't moved her hand near it, but she felt the urge now. They were treading too close to her best-kept secret. "Yes," Isona said. "I trust her. I know why she was let go from the Wraiths' service." She stood, pushing the desk chair back. "Leave us. I want a word with our former Wraith." "Ma'am," the spymaster objected. "I really don't think—" "Phantom, you will stay as well." Marika nodded and remained while everyone else shuffled out and closed the door behind them. They waited until they heard everyone had exited the front office too, before Marika opened the door and checked no one had stayed behind to listen. They all knew better. "Sentinel Nadia," Isona began and sat again. "I believed I knew what I needed to know about your dismissal from the Wraiths. Your child." "Yes, ma'am." "That is clearly not all of it. If I didn't know better, and believe it or not, I am familiar with wraiths and ghosts both, having had to endure their seemingly blank stares my entire life. One learns to read a lot from a little. And just now, I am certain you seriously considered slaying everyone in this room." "I would never—" Now, Isona waved her off. I do not think you'd act on such a thing. It takes a truly broken mind to do that. She leaned back in her chair and considered Nadia. Your mind is not broken. No, you are keeping it together remarkably well. She drummed her fingers on the armrests, considering everything. But the spy master is right. He has held that title for 15 years and knows his trade. You did keep vital information from the Wraiths. To proceed, we need to know why. We're in a desperate situation. We must be able to trust each other. Yes, ma'am. There was no denying her reasoning. I will ask you then. Why didn't you report the information about the device? Why didn't you tell the Wraiths about your interactions with Darrow? Nadia didn't react outwardly, but the Queen using Darrow's real name spoke volumes. She was shrewd and paid attention to details. No one here had access to Nadia's file in the cube, but the Queen didn't seem to need it. She knew there was a deeper connection. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't tell you. Oh, but you can. It will only stay between us. Isona indicated Marika at Nadia's side. Your relationship with Tricandis is personal, isn't it? Marika said. Does it matter anymore? It does when you didn't report your interactions with him. I didn't want to get caught up in his mess. Isona shared a look with Marika. I don't think so. That makes no sense unless such a connection could reveal something bigger, something more important. The woman smiled warmly at Nadia. I am not unfamiliar with such feelings myself, Sentinel, despite my duties as queen. Phantom Marika here has 2 boys still in Agartha. Nadia glanced sideways at Marika, who nodded her confirmation. Are you lying to me to manipulate me? Nadia asked. No, the Queen said. Never. Especially not in the situation we are in. Such schemes tend to fall back on you, and when they do, the deceived ones will always retaliate. I'm being honest, and I am telling you that whatever it is, it will remain among the 3 of us. We will never reveal your secrets. As added security, I suspect it holds no strategic value for our cause. I only need to be able to trust you to send you back home, to know that you will remain loyal to the ghosts, to me. Back home? To Agartha? Yes. Tricandis, Marika began. I mean Darrow. He is the father of your child, isn't he? The all-too-familiar sense of dread coiled inside Nadia at this question. She felt nothing but a need to protect her daughter. Marika lay a hand of warning on her shoulder. Don't do anything foolish, Sentinel. Nadia wouldn't, but for a split second there, she had wanted to. Felt a need to. Isona exhaled heavily and leaned back again. You did not keep this secret to hide the child from the Wraiths, then, she concluded. It was to protect it from the father. Nadia barely got air down to her lungs. Yes. The word was hard to say out loud, but they were perceptive women. Despite it all, she found herself admiring their intelligent assessment. How old is the child? Nadia scoffed softly, so unghost-like, but what did that matter now? Do you mean did I have a fling with Tricandis not long ago? She shook her head. No, this all happened before he was turned, when he was a mere young werewolf and nothing else. Is the child safe? Yes, far away from him. Not in Agartha, then? No. Isona nodded, and Marika let go of Nadia's shoulder. I won't pry any further, then, Isona said. Where the child is shall remain your last secret, Sentinel. If the child is safe from its father, then I'm satisfied with your loyalty. Marika had a blank look on her face and said nothing. Nadia couldn't deduce one way or the other if the phantom ghost agreed with the Queen. I will inform the spy master and everyone else who would question you that your secrets are connected to the Wraiths and will not be divulged to any one of us. They are, after all, my Wraiths, and I am privy to their secrets. Understood? Nadia blinked. She had not been cast out again. It was surreal. She'd known of the differing rules of the 2 Queen's guards, but this seemed too much of a leeway. "Sentinel?" "Understood," Nadia confirmed. "Good. Then on to our new plan." "Plan, ma'am?" Marika asked. "There is a potential weapon under the cube. It could be used against us again. We must destroy it, or possibly obtain it. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am. Gather a team. Sentinel Nadia will go with them." "Ma'am?" "She's the only one here who's seen it before and felt its actions. The same goes for this smaller device. Who is making these weapons for Kassemyr Darrow? He had managed the most unthinkable, to unite vampires and werewolves. Not all the wares of Calmont Hollow, ma'am," Nadia objected. Isona smiled. "True, but it is a frightening feat nonetheless." "Sentinel Nadia has only been with us a week, ma'am," Marika protested. "It is why I've kept her here in Fallen Oaks. She's not used to our ways yet." It was the reason she'd used all week to answer when Nadia had volunteered and expressed her will to go back, despite the danger. "I only wish to help, Phantom." Marika sighed. It was so soft that Nadia was the only one to hear it. "Now that I do trust," the Phantom Ghost said. "Good," Isona said and stood again, calmer this time. "I know the danger I'm sending you into, but it must be done. We are at war, and I need my soldiers focused. Gather the team and have them ready by Agartha's nightfall." Chapter 5. "He's on the team?" Nadia asked, looking at the assembled group of ghosts who'd met outside the back entrance to the school. "That's a little harsh, isn't it?" Harm hefted the satchel he was carrying. Marika, who'd been talking to one of the newly returned ghosts, frowned. "Chronicler is gifted in more ways than with books and archives. We might need him." "Also, my name is Harmiston. I have a feeling I'm not going to be a chronicler for much longer if we ever return to normal," he mumbled. "He's not even armed," Nadia pointed out. She didn't like this. Here they stood, 5 ghosts, armed to the teeth, and Harmiston looked like any other citizen. No, not any other. Nadia knew she was reacting because she didn't want him to join them. It would be too dangerous. Marika, upon hearing her comment, sighed and handed Harmiston one of her knives. Thanks," he said, and took it more by reflex than anything. "Anyway," he said to Nadia, "the last time I was handed a knife, I did well enough." He had. Against a werewolf. He'd killed it. That was with magic. So? A weapon is a weapon. Nadia pressed her lips together, considering. She could continue to argue, but the look in Marika's eyes told her not to. The Phantom was her superior, and she had to obey orders. When she didn't argue any further, Harmiston visibly relaxed, and Marika addressed everyone. "Carrie will lead the team," she told them. Aid and Barkin were the other 2 set to go. Barkin was one of the ghosts who'd returned from Agartha that day. The man, lean and with light brown hair, hadn't had many hours of rest, but like for any ghosts, that was more than enough. Nadia did not doubt his alert state. Aid, dark-haired and slender, yet incredibly strong, something Nadia had experienced during training sessions, stood quietly, assessing all that was said. Nadia felt confident these were excellent teammates. Harmiston, though, he was strong with magic, but by his own admission, what magic he knew, he had taught himself, keeping his gift hidden from the mages in the spellbound halls. She found she was more worried about his safety than angry about him coming along. "The objectives are 3-fold, Marika told them. 1, get the smaller device and bring it back here. 2, destroy the larger one or bring it back if you can. 3, eliminate whoever is creating these weapons for Kassemyr Darrow." "You don't want them brought back here?" Marika hesitated. "I'll leave it to your discretion, but someone working for that vampire and his hybrids is likely not up to our moral standards and easily swayed." "Moral standards?" Harmiston broke in. "Didn't you just order them to kill this person?" Every ghost, including Nadia, looked at him. without uttering a word. "All right," he said, hands up and palms toward them. "Never mind me. Pretend I'm not here." That was hard to do since the man hardly ever closed his mouth. Nadia successfully fought a smile at the thought. Then she remembered he was going with them, and the fight against that smile became easier to win. "Am I wrong in thinking you volunteered for this trip?" she asked Harmiston 10 minutes later when they were trudging through the forest surrounding fallen oaks, heading for the hidden shimmer that was their closest gateway to Agartha. "What? You don't think that Phantom Marika sought me out herself?" "No." "That wounds me, Nad," he said in a display of theatrical hurt. Nadia watched the other 3 ghosts ahead of them, their dark figures hard to spot in the darkened forest. She knew Aid was a half-breed lynx shifter, and that Barkin had some werewolf blood in his veins. They could likely hear some, if not everything, of what was said, but she had nothing to hide in this regard. Neither did Harmiston. His secret was out for everyone to know by now. The ghosts are no more likely to bring civilians on their missions than the wraiths are. So yes, I believe you volunteered. Why? To watch your back, he quipped, but was met with crickets. Literal ones. The noise permeated the surrounding space. All right. I heard about the device they found under the cube. It must have been in a tunnel I've never encountered. There are many of them, but I have to say it is unnerving how much access the ghosts actually had to the cube. Harm? Yes? You're volunteering. Ah, right. The rumors made the rounds in the last few hours, and I heard about it when Victoria came by the lab wanting to learn how to unlock a cell phone. She locked the phone? Nadia said, sidetracking the theme of the conversation herself now. She'd given her phone to Victoria so she could stay in touch with Nikolai while Nadia was gone. Yes, it was easy to fix. She just didn't know how to operate it. Earthside technology can be challenging, despite simple solutions, when you don't know about them. All she had to do was... All right, Nadia said. Let's get back to the volunteering part. Right. Harmiston smiled, and with her night vision, Nadia saw it better than most. I heard about this device and I agree. I think it has something to do with the attack on the cube and the palace. You know, I've been studying poisons lately and, more specifically, airborne poisons. Yes. Nadia took hold of a low-hanging branch Carrie held to avoid it smacking into her and handed it over to Harmiston for the same purpose. I can't get that to fit what happened, though. Yes, you told me. There were too many windows, doors, and other variables to keep the gas in place, so to speak. Harmiston nodded. I'm sure there was magic involved. So you want to have a look at the thing to figure it out? I do. And since we don't have any mages at hand, I'm kind of it. Even Marika saw that one. I see. Nadia looked up and saw the dark, looming shape of the bedrock outcrop which hid the shimmer from Earthsiders who didn't know where to look for it. Chronicler, Carrie said over his shoulder. Harmiston, he objected. Harmiston, Carrie said. You're first through. Are you now? Nadia commented. I might also have pointed out to the Phantom that I should go through and make sure my concealment charm is holding up. Uh-huh. Nadia had to give it to him. If he wanted something, he was clearly more than able to talk himself into getting it. I'm going next then, she said. Carrie saw no harm, given his nod to confirm her request. They climbed up to the large boulders which hid the entrance to another realm. Harm went first, squeezing in between the large rocks, and then stopped when Nadia put her hand on his shoulder. Wait until I'm properly in place, she told him. I'll follow you immediately. And brace yourself for the shade. She moved until she stood so close she was breathing on his neck. I kind of don't want to move now, he said. Harm? Oh, fine, he said, and stepped forward into the weak shimmer that was just enough this side of the veil to allow them through. Aren't you too sweet? Barkin said, right behind her. I'm not so sure there is an us anymore, Nadia said, not caring that they knew her business. It was often best when things were out in the open. She knew that better than most. The moment harm disappeared completely, she stepped forward and followed him. The shade attacked her senses the moment she stepped through the shimmer. Years of training brought forth her mental defenses, and she pushed the torment of the shade, the noises and whispers, to the back of her mind. Then she noticed harm close by. He'd stepped to the side to make room for the others to follow, and Nadia did the same, keeping quiet to avoid anyone seeing or hearing her. She didn't have the full picture of their surroundings yet, and needed to tread carefully. She reached for her amulet and awoke the tiny lizard in it, the magical creature quickly masking every noise she made, everything except her voice. "My concealment glamour still works," Harmiston whispered while leaning in. She touched his elbow and gave a gentle squeeze to acknowledge what he said, because certain creatures had excellent hearing. He was right, though. They, and the other 3 ghosts, were covered in shadows so close to the gateway they'd used. Every sense flooded back to Nadia on this side of the veil, and she used them to watch and listen, but no one was near from what she could deduce. Apparently, neither could the others, because, after half a minute, Carrie signaled for them to move forward. Despite nighttime being the time for vamps to roam, both werewolves and hybrids could move in daylight. The dark of night was still the ghosts' best chance at cover, though. It was the lesser of 2 evils. They'd had status reports back from ghosts on previous missions, and they had reported that hybrids, vamps, and werewolves all kept watch in the shade. It was how they controlled the city. Any trade or travel to and from Agartha went through the shade, and a defense against the hybrids was hard fought. The ghosts knew that firsthand now. It had been decades since they'd lost so many of their own in battle. Carrie signaled again, ordering them to move toward the city proper. Despite the night sky above, reflecting the time of night up on the surface, the shade in its strangeness still had a little more light to see in, a dull and dingy light that only enhanced the cruel nature of the shade. More than one Agarthan believed it to be an entity of ill will toward anyone who ventured inside it. Nadia stayed close to Harmiston to keep an eye on him, noting the strain in his eyes. He didn't have the training the rest of them did, and the shade likely preyed on his brilliant mind. She wanted to say something reassuring, but couldn't. That was just as well. It let her hear the soft crunch of a foot in the sand somewhere behind them. She didn't hesitate when a shadow glided forth, quick and ruthless. Nadia had her silver knife out before the creature. A vamp reached them. It had its sights on Harmiston first. Oblivious to the threat, the chronicler only looked sideways when Nadia suddenly disappeared from his side. She twisted and pushed forward, shoving her free hand into the hard and fast shape of the vamp. This didn't topple it. It staggered a little to the side, gracefully regaining its balance. Nadia wasn't about to let it continue its trajectory toward Harmiston, though. She pounced on the beast. Her silver-bladed knife swung fast and ruthless. The vamp, waxy pale and with its ghastly fangs, hissed at her. She needed to make this short. Any sound of a fight could draw others. Nadia sliced into the vamp's forearms, while it backed up slightly, protecting itself from her onslaught. She needed her sword, but didn't have a second to spare to draw it. That would give the vamp an edge. Instead, she banked on her fellow ghosts, having had a moment to react by now. Nadia leaped forward, grabbed the vamp's throat with her free hand, and stabbed the knife into its abdomen. The creature opened its mouth to scream, but no sound came. Being back in Agartha had brought back Nadia's half-breed werewolf strength. Her grip on the vamp was like steel, crunching vocal cords, which even the undead needed to be heard. The vamp wasn't giving in without a fight, though. She felt one clawed hand trying to get a grip on her hip, the other reaching for her knife in its belly. Nadia yanked it out and stabbed it into the vamp's throat in the same movement, hard and efficient. Blood spurted sideways, and then a shadow emerged above her and the vamp. She let go and jumped backward, allowing Carrie the swing he needed to cut the head off the vamp. No sound escaped the creature, and all 4 ghosts huddled together around the falling corpse, to hide the smoldering embers that burned the vampire to ashes. Except for the vampire's scuffles on the sand, no sound had escaped. The ghosts all looked down at the remains of the guard. Nadia lowered her brows and looked up at her unspoken question. Where had he come from? All the other three looked back and up at the wall, where the shimmering, silvery green lights showed the gateways through the veil to other realms. The vampire must have been keeping watch from the 90-degree cavern wall. They stood still for a few minutes, listening, assessing, watching. Harmiston was close by, completely silent, not moving, simply awaiting their orders in this place that was so inhospitable. That was lucky, Carrie finally whispered, drawing raised eyebrows from Harmiston, who looked like he couldn't believe his ears. Carrie offered a rare, closed-lip smile. It could have been a hybrid. Chapter 6. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy in Agartha. People went to work, went to the shops, ate their dinners together, and generally stayed close to their loved ones. Nadia and the others spent the rest of the night and morning sneaking through the streets of the city, observing what was going on. They'd snagged a few coats on their way to hide their colors, the color of the queen, but it was fairly easy to move around unnoticed. People kept their heads down when they had to leave the safety of their homes. The streets weren't empty, but not far from it either. It was the hybrids and their followers who patrolled the streets. Those followers consisted of the vampires of Nightworth, a few werewolves of Calmont Hollow, and even some humans. The police had been disbanded, and the wraiths had disappeared. If not for Kassemyr's guards, Nadia and the rest could have moved faster, but they needed to go undetected to be able to achieve their mission. They couldn't risk being spotted. You know, Aide whispered to Nadia while they were perched on the fire escape of a tall building in the city center. You really don't make much noise. Nadia refrained from answering and kept her eyes on the werewolves down the street who were not heading their way. With the sun up, at least the vampires were out of the game. That was one less enemy to worry about for a while. They moved on and soon came across one of the larger shopping streets, which had an open space surrounding a large fountain that did not spurt any water. Voices drew the team nearer, and they approached with caution, keeping their distance as usual by hiding in one of the side streets. Looks like they rounded up some people, Harmiston whispered, and stepped closer. Hey, he added to Nadia. Mind if I have a look at your necklace? Nadia narrowed her eyes. Harmiston, of all people, knew it was an amulet, and not a piece of jewelry. The one you fixed by repairing the glass with mere tools, you mean? She asked him. He had lied that day, telling her he'd only used some crude tools to fix the magical artifact, and she had believed him. Now she knew better. He'd repaired the magic with magic. Yes? He said sheepishly through a winning smile. How did he do that? Nadia removed the amulet and handed it over. As long as she was together with the rest of them, she was, in a sense, unmasked by their heartbeats and breaths anyway. Keeping a safe distance from the enemy was their best course of action. 2 trucks were parked in the square, and the team could see a man standing on the edge of the dry fountain. He was shouting out names from a list on some papers in his hand. This must be the culling, Carrie said. It is, Barkin confirmed. We witnessed one a couple of days ago, too. They'd all heard of the culling from the ghosts who'd gone back to Agartha on previous missions. Kassemyr kept peace in the city and controlled its borders and all the trade necessary to live there. In exchange for that control and suffocating peace, he and his followers punished people for anything they wanted to on a whim, and they also required food. According to the ghosts who'd been here before, the citizens of Agartha had to pay that price, and the price was blood. It had been a problem before that the vampires of Nightworth didn't wholly abide by the Queen's law to not feed on humans and other species without their consent. And they were never to kill anyone. Everyone knew it happened, but it was hard to prove at times. Now, though, they used the records of the city to summon the citizens so they could volunteer as tithes, as Kassemyr called it. They were promised not to be killed, but had to make the sacrifice to pay for his and his followers' protection. Nadia focused on her breathing to keep her flaring anger in check at the sight. The people who had no choice but to attend the summoning stood in line, visibly shaking and crying while being crossed off the list. Those who tried not to show up would be hunted down, and no doubt found, considering they lived in a city with no way out. The punishment was worse than this. No ghost had seen it on their runs in the city, but they'd heard the rumors of such people becoming the playthings of the hybrids. No one lived to tell the tale. After about 10 minutes, the line of people was herded onto the back of the trucks. The one with the larger group headed toward the royal palace, and the other in the opposite direction. "Let's follow that one," Carrie said, and nodded sideways toward the street he wanted them to take. "If our intel is correct, that one is headed for Nightworth. That's close to Jade Mansion. And if it's feeding time in the palace too, then I bet Kassemyr is there." They followed without any questions. If the smallest bounty went to Nightworth, then it was hardly likely that Kassemyr was there. The team had many tasks to attend to, both in the palace and in Jade Mansion, but found it best to start where Kassemyr likely wasn't. They didn't manage to keep up with the truck, but reached Nightworth when the people on board were being herded out and up toward the entrance. Some screamed, others were apathetic, some fell, some shivered. "This is a travesty," Nadia said. "It is," Carrie agreed, his eyes on the harrowing sight. Likely they would all come out again, weakened but alive yet traumatized. It was a small comfort. And who knew if one or more of the vamps, especially the younger ones in the closed-off cluster of mansions, lost control and killed their victims? They hadn't even reached the door yet. Nadia, despite her years of training, took a step forward. She instantly felt 2 hands on her shoulders. Aide and Carrie stood close by her sides. "Sentinel, keep calm," Carrie told her. "We can stop this. You see that, right? Those guards are armed humans and a few wares. That's it." "Doesn't matter." "It does matter." Nadia twisted out of their grips, but had to step back to do so. They closed ranks in front of her, preventing her from going. She looked at them, 3 stony faces and Harmiston's worried one. His gaze flickered between the ghosts and the people being herded like cattle for slaughter, or at least herded for draining. "We have a duty to interfere and help those people. The vamps are breaking the Queen's law." "No, we don't," Carrie said. "You forget yourself, Nadia. That is the duty of the Wraiths, wherever they are. We are the Queen's ghosts, and our duty is to protect her and follow her direct orders. You are not a Wraith anymore, but one of us now. Our orders are not to reveal ourselves to save a few from this horrid fate, but to follow the plan that might in the end help save everyone and restore the Queen as ruler of this city." Nadia closed her mouth. She agreed. She did. Of course she did. But was the Queen's seat in the city truly worth more than the safety of her people? "Are you with us?" Carrie asked her. She glanced toward the first people entering Nightworth on top of the front steps, and then focused on him. She gave a quick nod. "Good. Then I expect you to keep your head in this game." "Of course, Sentinel." Seething on the inside, she followed the other ghosts down a side street, away from Nightworth, toward Jade Mansion. She met Harmiston's gaze and found at least one ally there, but he wasn't a ghost, and had no impact on their decision-making. When they reached Jade Mansion, everything was quiet. Nadia had noticed before how the neighbors kept out of any business happening near the beautiful house with the large garden surrounding it. It had likely always paid to turn a blind eye to the comings and goings of that place to keep one's blood intact. Now didn't seem any different to Nadia. The area was quiet and appeared void of people. With her senses, though, she detected the odd person inside the neighboring buildings. They hadn't been sent away. They simply knew their place at this point, even more so now than before. Following Nadia's instructions, since she'd been here before, they searched the area in no hurry, watching the mansion and learning the routes of the werewolf guards. For the next hour, they did nothing to attract those guards' attention. Instead, they found a vantage point atop one of the neighboring mansions. The climb left Nadia impressed by Harmiston, who was able to keep up. He didn't bother much with the guards, leaving that to the ghosts, while he studied the amulet he kept in his hand. "Jade Mansion is the only building with people coming and going," Barkin whispered after they'd been paying close attention for a while. "I doubt Kassemyr is there, though," Nadia said. "That would have required more guards now that he's the ruler of the city." "Yes," Carrie agreed. "But something is going on over there. That's a lot of people in and out in only half an hour." "I believe them to be exactly that," Barkin added. "Humans." They were right. It wasn't a large group, but several people had come and gone. 17 in total, in and out, a few even to take a break in the garden. Out of those 17, 12 remained in the mansion. How many more was hard to say. The guards in the streets surrounding the building were werewolves, just like Nadia had experienced before. But then, Kassemyr had seemed to be a divisive figure at Nightworth, even before the brutal and public murder of the older vamp leader, Azirad Neris. He might be their leader now, but trusting them with his safety was another matter. And these werewolves were, as Nadia had experienced before, true fanatical followers, all sporting the tattoo marking them as hybrid loyalists. Many probably hoped for him to turn them at some point. The already existing hybrids had proved to be powerful enemies. Nadia needed to get closer to be certain of the people's heritage, but she had to trust the senses of her fellow ghosts. More humans meant less powerful creatures. Not that humans were weak. Many ghosts and wraiths were pure humans, and deadly to boot. These, though, seemed more like staff of some kind. "They must have some purpose in there. Those aren't only servants," Barkin went on. "Looks like office workers or scientists to me," Harmiston volunteered. They all turned toward him, where he sat a little behind them, focusing on the amulet. The ghosts asked surprisingly few questions about the trinket, leaving Nadia to admit that despite them only following the queen, they had the freedom to have secrets as long as they didn't threaten any of their fellow ghosts. It was strange, yet refreshing. "Why do you say that?" Aide asked. "Huh?" Harmiston, entranced with what he was studying as usual, looked up. "Well, look at them. They're dressed for it. They carry note ledgers. They even walk around in the garden mulling things over in their heads and jotting down ideas. It's rather obvious." "It is?" Barkin said. Harmiston blinked. "I mean, yes." "Just take his word for it," Nadia said. "He works with people like that all the time." Harmiston beamed at her, and then focused on the amulet again, lost in his thoughts, just like many of the people down in and outside Jade Mansion. "At least he used to," Nadia added. But if he heard, Harmiston didn't react. His place of work was no more. "This bodes well for our intel, then," Carrie said. "If the device was the weapon used to take out everyone in the cube and the palace, then maybe the people who made it are here. We need to interrogate them." "All of them?" Barkin asked. "That would be useful," Carrie said, while Nadia noticed the sound of a rumbling engine approaching. "But we don't have that much time. A few would suffice. We need to take out the guards first, of course. After that, our time will be limited." "Look," Nadia said, and indicated the car which turned into the street further down. "That's a nice-looking car," Aide said. "Stolen from the royal garage, no doubt." Carrie frowned while watching the moving vehicle. "Spoils of the temporary victors. Perhaps Kassemyr is coming home for a visit?" "I doubt it in broad daylight," Nadia said. "He is a pure vamp, after all." "Tracandus, then?" "Maybe," Nadia said, and held her breath when the car stopped. A chauffeur got out and went around the large, gray car to open the door to his backseat passenger. It was not Kassemyr, nor Tricandis. Instead, a hulking figure stepped out. A werewolf or hybrid, Nadia figured. Then came a woman with medium-length blonde hair. She was elegantly dressed in the wide, flowing pants that were so fashionable at court before the fall of the city, and a dark blouse. She exchanged a few words with the hulking man at her side, and then they walked up to the mansion and entered. Nadia noted the front doors being opened by someone on the inside before the woman reached them. She was expected in that place and walked with the confidence of someone who had been there before and knew they were welcome. "Have you seen her before?" Carrie asked her. Nadia shook her head. "No, but by the looks of her, she is the one we're going to want to chat with." "Agreed. That only leaves the problem of how to get inside without too many noticing." "I think I might be able to help with that," Harmiston said. Again, they all turned toward him. "It's weird how you always look at me funny like that, guys." Chapter 7. "Are you sure about this?" Carrie asked, a slight frown on his face. "No, but we're about to find out, right?" Harmiston said with a smile. They were walking between two of the neighboring buildings to Jade Mansion. In a few meters, they'd have to be completely silent to avoid the nearby werewolf guard from hearing their approach. "That's not how one goes into a possibly violent situation." "Possibly violent? From what I've seen of the situation in the city, violence is guaranteed," Aide said. "All right," Harmiston said, and stopped. "How about me being fairly certain then?" "Whatever it is you have to do, I suggest you do it now," Carrie said. They all surrounded Harmiston while he lost his usual mask of cheerfulness. Instead, he raised his right hand, palm up, and focused on a weak, golden light that emerged from it. It grew and expanded until it hovered above his hand like a round shield laying flat in the air. Nadia watched with curiosity as she recognized parts of the symbolism that appeared within the frame of the shield. Among many sigils and symbols she couldn't interpret was a stylized lizard form that twisted in between them. The shape of the lizard turned the same turquoise color as her amulet. Somehow, Harmiston was copying and amplifying the magic of the Anemoy Newt amulet. The shield grew and then covered them all with a radius of about 10 meters around Harmiston. Then it disappeared from view. "Is it gone?" Barkin asked. "No, merely invisible to the untrained eye," Harmiston said. "We're clearly not without sound." "Actually," Nadia said, "we are. Listen. I can't hear your breathing or moving around. It doesn't stop our voices, nor if we hit something outside ourselves with great force, but we are effectively muted." The other three ghosts stopped what they were doing to listen and slowly nodded their agreement. "You saw the boundary," Harmiston continued. "I can't expand it without focusing too much. You better stay close." "Then so do you, chronicler." "Harmiston," said Harmiston, to no avail. Unlike the wraiths, the ghosts were more used to formalities, living at court most of their lives. "Let's go," Carrie ordered, and they moved on, nearing the werewolf. Harmiston fell back to Nadia and handed her the amulet. "Don't you need it to keep your shield going?" she asked. Harmiston shook his head. "I think I got it now." Nadia fastened the amulet around her neck again, and it felt safe and familiar. The tiny Anemoy Newt was awake and protecting her despite not needing to at the moment. It would soon slumber again unless she kept rousing it with warmth from her hand. But Harmiston not needing it anymore only confirmed something she'd suspected a while now. This is how you've gone about it your whole life, isn't it? You've learned to control your magic step by step, on your own, piecing it all together in a series of trials and errors. Not so many errors as you'd think. I don't think that at all. I've seen you work. You're meticulous. I'm not sure if you're complimenting me or not, Nad. I'm just wondering what you could have become had you let them train you properly. Everyone dealing with magic in any form needed to be taught to master their skills. Not even Harmiston was an exception to that, but his control and range had her suspecting he was a particularly strong mage who'd missed out on training that would have led him to truly master all he was capable of. "That's the thing," he said, his smile a sad one now. "They would have made me great, and then harnessed it all and locked me away." Nadia didn't get to respond. At that moment, Carrie signaled for everyone to be quiet. They had reached the quadrant which one of the werewolves guarded. There was no way for so many of them to enter the mansion without him noticing, so they needed him taken out. They'd paid close attention to the guards for a while now, and it seemed that after Nadia had taken one of them out a while back, they now had new countermeasures to avoid such attacks going undiscovered. The guards regularly met up to prove they were uncompromised. The ghosts fell into position, waiting for the werewolf to fall into their trap. They needed to silence him before he could alert any of the other guards. It didn't take long. The hulking figure of a man soon came walking in between the two mansions, following his route, seemingly just taking a walk in this neighborhood. He didn't look the part with his old and worn clothes covering his large, muscled frame. He looked young, too, and Nadia remembered Nilafar mentioning that the ones who'd left Calmont Hollow were young and disillusioned wares. This one looked no more than 20, if that. Thanks to Harmiston's charm, he didn't hear them. He could smell, though, but by the time he reacted to their scents, it was too late. He'd passed Carrie and Aid when the four of them stepped out, effectively surrounding him. "Ghosts!" he blurted, sounding genuinely surprised. Given their plan, they'd shed their stolen coats and now showed their true colors, all except Harmiston, who had also stepped out from among the shadows but who wore regular clothes. It separated him from the rest of the group. The werewolf understood his situation at once and didn't hesitate. He abruptly began moving and shifted mid-stride. The ghosts all ran toward him, but the now wolfish creature, even larger and more fearsome, swiped to the sides with its clawed hands. Then it ran straight for Harmiston. Nadia drew breath, which stuck in her throat at the sight. The werewolf went for the one he perceived as the weakest enemy, hoping to break away from the ghosts that way. Harmiston stepped back but didn't turn. Instead, he leaned back to avoid having his throat sliced by those long and sharp claws. Then he raised his hands, and the werewolf froze. Nadia saw the beast fight to move forward, his large, hulking form nearly doing so too, but the ghosts got there first. 4 swords cut into the beast, right through its upper body. It was a wonder that they didn't meet inside him. The shock and pain rendered the were unable to scream. At least one sword had pierced his heart. A quick nod from Carrie to Barkin had the latter yank his sword free, while the other 3 held the werewolf in place. Barkin swung his sword and cut the were's head clean off. The werewolf didn't return to his human form after that. It merely slumped to the ground when the other 3 swords were retracted from its body. Harmiston uttered when Aid and Carrie began pulling the dead werewolf back behind some garbage bins. "He was so young." Nadia turned and saw the shock on his face. He looked pale. "He would have killed you, Harm. Do not think otherwise." "But, you hear me?" He looked from the dead body being dumped unceremoniously on the ground and back to her, meeting her eyes. He must have seen the seriousness there, because he nodded and said no more. Had he hesitated instead of reacting, he would have been dead. It reminded her of why she hadn't wanted to bring him along, but then, he could take care of himself, couldn't he? "Nice catch," Barkin said to the unsettled chronicler before they moved on. "We have 45 minutes before the guard 3 streets over realizes something is wrong." Carrie reminded them. "It's now or never, so let's act." No one argued, and they all followed him. With that particular guard out of the picture, they could enter the back garden unseen from the streets at least. The garden stretched out from the large townhouse which landed them in open space before they reached the back door of Jade Mansion. They needed to remain unseen until they entered through that door. After that, this would no longer be a stealth mission. While keeping watch to all sides, including up toward the windows that were not boarded up, the team entered the garden over the fence, which was a boundary and privacy feature more than a burglary deterrent. That had always been Kassemyr himself. No one appeared to notice them. They ran quickly across the freshly mowed lawn, not a sound escaping Harmiston's magical shield. They reached the back door, just when a click sounded. Someone locked the door from the inside. They had been spotted at the last second. "Break it down," Carrie ordered. "Harm can do it more quietly," Nadia pointed out, remembering his handling of the locked door to the pump house in the cube garden. "Right," he said, and hurried forth while Carrie stepped aside. Harmiston put his hands against the lock, and a glow of blue showed before the same metallic click sounded. At least, this wouldn't draw any of the other guards. Carrie signaled for Harmiston to step aside, and the ghosts went inside first. A shout of fear rose, and Nadia shut the door to contain the noise. "No one leaves this house," Carrie said, and they all ran forward to carry out his orders. Barkin ran straight through to find the front door. They had to act fast to avoid anyone escaping, and that included the windows, not only the doors. Screams rose as they went. A few, clearly more guards, attacked, but the ghosts were highly trained and efficient fighters. 2 more werewolves went down at the hands of Carrie and Aid. Nadia dodged a clumsy fist headed her way and sent her own in return, punching a man in the throat before she saw he was likely a servant. The man's eyes turned wide, and he staggered and fell on his back, struggling to breathe. Nadia regretted it, but had no time to dwell on it. He was incapacitated for the next couple of minutes, judging by his lack of experience in dealing with pain. Nadia ran after a woman who made a beeline for the nearest window, straight through a hallway, inside a kitchen-adjacent workroom. The woman, probably 20 years her senior, fumbled with the window, screaming in fear at the approaching horror Nadia clearly was to her. The woman was no threat. Nadia grabbed her arm and pulled her back through the hallway. "In here!" Carrie ordered. "All of them." He stood next to a door leading out from a simple living room. It was less luxurious than other parts of the house, and Nadia assumed them to be in the servants' part. The door Carrie referred to led into a utility room with no other exit. It would have to do. Nadia shoved the frightened woman in there to join the others who'd already been caught. Then it was on to the next one. Nadia brought back 2 more, including the man she'd throat-punched, as well as a springy man who clearly wished to be a guard. Nadia had to give him a budding black eye to convince him to give up. It all made her feel awful. She'd been in many a raid as a wraith, but they had always let innocent bystanders run away when they'd attacked. This was different. Even though they weren't seriously harming them, they were terrorizing these people. "None of the scientists are here," Barkin pointed out. "Upstairs," Carrie said. "Barricade the door." They all ran to find things to cover it with, keeping the 11 people they'd gathered from escaping and alerting anyone. Their screams would have tipped off anyone else inside, and on other floors, though. "I can do it," Harmiston said. He'd kept quiet and not interfered with the ghost's handling of the situation. His handsome face was a mask of assumed neutrality. Nadia suspected what he thought about all of this and felt even more ashamed, but it had to be done. She hoped he understood that. "Then do it," Carrie told the self-taught mage. "It won't last more than 30 minutes or so," Harmiston explained as he ran over to the door and summoned his magic. "That'll do." Carrie looked in the direction of the front of the house, from where Barkin had returned. That was their route. A yellow-colored seal spread across the door and then vanished, much as the sound-muting shield had. "That should do it." Harmiston stood. The prisoners wouldn't get out. "Upstairs, then." Carrie indicated their intended direction with a nod. "You know," Harmiston told Nadia where they ran after the others, "when I transferred to the Wraiths, I hoped they would be more chatty than the ghosts." "And?" "No such luck. Both Queen's guards are people of too few words. Sorry. See what I mean? Nadia couldn't help a tight-lipped smile. They reached the foyer and the large stairs that led up. It was brightly lit by the chandeliers above. No one was in sight, and they rushed up, taking 2 and 3 steps at a time. They needed to be swift to both avoid wasting time and not giving anyone a chance to gather in any organized counterattack. That lasted until they reached the top of the stairs when a bottle glowing red was thrown their way. The ghosts had no trouble avoiding it, but realized too late that they should have caught it instead. The bottle landed between them, right on the penultimate step at the top where it broke and exploded into a bright red burst of energy which slung all of them to the sides like rag dolls. Chapter 8. Red, glittering lights floated before Nadia's eyes. She groaned in pain. Her back hurt. Her head, too. She blinked hard, trying to rid herself of the dizziness that had gripped her. The blinking lights turned out to be reflections in the swinging chandelier above the monstrous central staircase of Kassemyr's mansion. The explosion. Nadia forced all thoughts of pain aside and looked around. The other ghosts were getting up, reaching for their dropped weapons. Nadia did the same, wincing at the pain in her back. Nothing was broken, though, so it could be dealt with later. She hurried to check that Harmiston was alive, which he thankfully was, getting to his feet further down the stairs. "Those are ghosts," someone above said. It was a deep male voice. "What tipped you off, smarty? The blue color?" A female voice added the snarky comment and was met with a decidedly non-human growl. Nadia rose to her full height and saw it was the woman who'd arrived in the car. She was accompanied by the hulking man who'd come with her then, too. A werewolf, if ever Nadia had seen one. "Get on with it, witch," he snarled at the woman, or witch, judging by his calling her that and the potion she'd thrown at them. The witch sighed dramatically. "I think you've misconstrued the term bodyguard, Milwer." Then she revealed another bottled potion in her hand and threw it down the stairs. "Incoming!" Barkin yelled, and they all jumped over the railing on each side of the staircase, Harmiston throwing himself down the stairs rather than be hit straight on by that force. Nadia landed on the floor just as the explosion roared up above. She didn't stand around waiting, but ran around and reached the bottom of the stairs. Harmiston lay on the floor, his face a grimace of pain. "You all right?" she asked and grabbed his jacket to haul him back, while the other ghosts gathered around them. "Yes, except for where you're grabbing me." He twisted out of her grip, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He must have landed on it. It looked even with the other one, so Nadia assumed it still to be in its socket. "You'll live," she told him. "You say the sweetest things." "You call that witchcraft?" Milwer commented from above. "I don't see you doing any better." The witch responded. Nadia noticed how neither one of them looked frightened or worried at the attack inside Kassemyr's home. That either meant they were too sure of themselves, which would be nice, or that they had little reason to be worried, which was decidedly worse. "Go on, then," the witch went on. "Fetch!" "You are terrible," Milwer snorted at her. But he did run forth without warning, changing form while he bounded down the stairs, his big human body giving way for the larger, heavily muscled and fur-covered body of a werewolf. Nadia knew instinctively, at the sight of those vicious yellow eyes, that this werewolf would be a different challenge to the guard they'd taken out in the street. With a deep growl, the beast lashed out, claws slashing at the ghosts. Barkin shoved Harmiston behind him, and the 4 of them faced the massive werewolf on all sides. They did not wait their turn to attack. Instead, they all went for him, avoiding each other's blades with quick reflexes that had been honed over years of training. Their swords cut into the fur-covered flesh, and the beast howled at the pain they inflicted. Their silver-inlaid swords did not stop him, though, and neither of them managed to stab him through. They had to move too fast to avoid being struck for that. Nadia heard a shout from behind. The witch, maybe? She couldn't turn to look. That would earn her a set of claws in her face or abdomen. She ducked under the were's attempt and then twisted away when he kicked with his hind leg a second later. Barkin was hit then by the swing of the were's claws, thankfully the backside of that hand. He staggered a second, and the werewolf landed a kick in his side, which sent him flying sideways from the impact. Nadia saw Harmiston there, nothing but concentration on his face and Marika's knife in his hand. Nadia swung her sword to divert the beast's attention, slicing into its upper arm. The werewolf twisted and snarled at her, but kept up the fight against all of them still. He was formidable. This werewolf had seen battle before and knew how to use his incredible strength to protect himself and harm others. If that witch was important, and Nadia had no doubt she was, then there was a reason this beast had been assigned to protect her. And clearly, the two of them had been through a fight or two before. A distinct howl, short and piercing, almost like a sharp whistle escaped the werewolf. Nadia noticed, despite ducking, kicking, and lashing out with her sword, his blazing eyes turned upward toward her. Was he expecting something? Nadia jumped back and risked a look. She barely had time to yell out a warning before another bottled potion hit the floor, between them all. The werewolf had been expecting it, and it leaped forward, barely avoiding Carrie's sword cutting into its hind leg. The bottle, this one also glowing red from its magical contents, hit the floor and broke into pieces. Nadia braced herself for the inevitable. They couldn't jump away and be protected by the side of the stairs down there. They were all by the front door. The blast never came. Not completely. The ghosts had all raised their arms to protect their heads in a useless move. They'd all seen the force of these things. But Harmiston ran forth, his right hand held out in front of him, fingers splayed. Something almost see-through and blue shot forward and covered the rising blast of red. It looked like a small dome covered the witch's potion, and the blast imploded on itself under there with a muffled bang. All the ghosts exhaled in short, hard breaths, which no one could hear because Harmiston's shield was still active. They all stared at him. "I don't think we're done," he said, and pointed at the stairs. "A mage?" the witch shouted down at the werewolf who was perched halfway up the stairs. Like her, he'd taken the expected result of the explosion for granted. Nadia couldn't blame her for her surprise. Mages famously did not walk around the streets of Agartha. "Milwer!" she shouted. "Kill him!" She threw another bottle over the werewolf. It landed like before, but Harmiston stopped the explosion in the same manner, covering it with a dome of pure energy. All that remained were 2 charcoal marks on the polished hardwood floor. The witch shouted something in anger, but none of them heard it. They were all fixated on Milwer, who ran down the stairs again and straight for them. No, straight for Harmiston now, and unlike the werewolf outside, deeming him the greater threat. That was likely true, but it didn't stop the ghosts from defending him. They all moved in front of him, forming a line, but the frantic and quick movements of the werewolf meant that attacking from all sides was better. They needed to twist, bend, and jump to avoid his vicious claws. They endured many near hits, and full-on hits, barely escaping with a few shallow cuts. But in the end, the beast managed to break their wall, forcing Carrie and Aid back on the left, with his fanged maw and claws, and Barkin and Nadia on the other side, with its hind legs equally clawed and larger. The werewolf swirled around in a rage of flailing that forced the ghosts back, and then he went for Harmiston. It seemed the chronicler lost all memory of magic in that moment. Instead, he shouted something and lashed out with his hand, thrusting the knife straight up. It disappeared into the fur of the beast, who stopped moving for half a second. Then its brain registered what had happened, and it reared back, a deep, guttural sound escaping its throat where blood dripped out. Nadia reacted more to the smell than the sight. Harmiston had stabbed the beast in the throat and injured it, but not killed it. Still, that moment of rage and shock was what she needed. As the beast moved back and then twisted around, remembering there were more foes around him, she was already on her way down to the floor. The werewolf expected them to attack like before, protecting themselves at the same time. It didn't see Nadia before it was too late, and she already had her sword aimed up. The tip sliced into its chest and then further into its belly as the werewolf couldn't stop his trajectory in time. Nadia barely saw the other ghosts move forward, the flash of light reflected from their blades, before a sickening whimper sounded and something heavy landed on her. Nadia looked up to find Harmiston's blue eyes in her line of sight. "Are you all right?" he asked, looking like an odd mix of someone who was deeply worried, yet also wanted to laugh. Nadia found she could move her neck and looked up and down herself. One of the were's legs and his tail lay across her body. "Never better," she croaked, realizing she'd had her breath knocked out of her. Her lungs burned. "What have you done?" the witch screamed from atop the stairs. Harmiston helped lift the heavy body so Nadia could get out. Milwer's body now slowly morphed back into his human form. This sometimes happened if the shifter's last thought was a wish to do this. There was blood pouring out from under him due to Nadia's attack. His neck was also nearly severed from his shoulders. Nadia had been lucky to avoid the mess getting on her. "Milwer?" the witch shouted. "He's not going to answer you, witch," Carrie shouted back to be heard over her heavy, angered breathing. "I'm starting to believe the two of them had a thing," Harmiston volunteered. That was when the woman shouted something in a strange language and ran down the stairs herself. She produced 2 more bottles from her person, glowing green this time. Nadia did not wish to find out what they could do. Nor did she have to. Harmiston seemed to have had enough, and he summoned the blue energy for his domes again. But this time, instead of waiting for the witch to throw the potions, he sent the glowing rounded shape directly for her. It hit her straight on, sending her falling back on the stairs. She dropped the bottles, but they didn't break. Instead, the woman grunted in pain and bit her teeth together. Without her potions, she conjured a yellow flaming light and formed it into a ball. Mages drew all their powers from within and learned to harness them, whereas witches did this to a varying degree. Most of them had some innate powers, but all of them were excellent at manipulating and summoning forces through physical objects, materials, and spells. Still, this witch's innate powers didn't look like a joke. She hurled her magic toward Harmiston. Nadia noticed Barkin going for him and ran the other way herself then. She drew her dagger and, despite its lack of magical forces, threw it at the witch. It struck her side, and she screamed in shock. Then she twisted as something hit her other side. She lost her balance completely then and tumbled down the stairs, where she landed at the bottom, unconscious, not dead, her heart beating erratically. Nadia looked to the others and saw to her utter relief Harmiston safe behind Barkin, who had pulled him away from the magic which had now turned into a smoking crater in the front door. Chapter 9. "We're losing time. Nadia, lead the way," Carrie ordered. Nadia, the only one to have been there before, did as told and headed up the grand stairs first. The others followed, taking the dazed witch with them. "It was down this hallway," Nadia explained a couple of minutes later. If they wished to learn anything about Kassemyr's weapons, the lab inside the mansion was a good place to start. "This is a bedroom," Carrie pointed out when she located the correct room and opened the door. Surrounded as she was by people who'd been cut here and there and also carried the faint sense of blood, the pristinely clean room brought back memories for Nadia. She'd noticed it before, too, how clean this house was, almost to the point of being more like a museum than a home. "You all need to stay back," she told the others before approaching the door inside the bedroom. It was next to a small desk, closed and with light streaming between the door and the frame. "I fell unconscious last time because of the device." The others stood back. She had no idea how it worked, but she hadn't been affected last time until she was up close. Hopefully, the others could hold their breaths and pull her out if it happened again. With her sword ready, she reached for the handle and opened the door. There was no silvery light emanating from the large device like last time. Instead, a petri dish came flying at her head. Nadia reacted on instinct, moved, and it flew past her head and crashed to the floor behind her. She forgot about it instantly, staring into the lab, which was now crowded by 6 people. 6 terrified people. Nadia halted, staring back at them, though the lack of emotion on her face hardly did anything to calm them down. They were pressing together on the opposite side of the small lab, glassware falling to the floor and breaking because of their distracted and erratic movements to get away in a room that allowed no escape, since the only window was boarded up to allow safe access to vampires. "Everything all right?" Carrie asked from behind her. "Yes," Nadia answered amidst frightened whispers of ghosts. "I believe we found the scientists." 3 minutes later, the 6 people were safely stowed away and locked inside one of the other bedrooms in the same hallway. The witch had been securely tied to a chair in the bedroom outside the lab, being watched over and questioned, while Harmiston was like a child in a toy shop inside the lab. "This is like winning a prize at a fair for him, isn't it?" Aid asked. "Yes." Nadia shook her head, but figured he was the best among them to get this part done quickly. "You won't believe this, guys," he rambled on, moving from desk to desk and checking all the notes and papers he found, eyeing and sometimes smelling the test tubes with liquids in them. "It's here. Plans and specs on the device. They refer to it as a bomb, which is odd since it doesn't emit any explosion." "Oh, wow," he suddenly blurted, noticing something on the neighboring table. "Look at this. The drawings. I mean, this is gold to us." "To you, I think," Nadia said, though it seemed to fall on deaf ears as Harmiston kept talking and gathering all the information he could and had a need for. "Where is it?" rang Carrie's stern voice from behind Nadia and Aid. The laughter he got in return made both of them turn from the excited chronicler to a more urgent matter. The witch was wounded. She'd taken a deep cut in her right side, below her ribs. Nothing vital was harmed, so her biggest concern there lay in handling the pain and getting the wound cleaned. On her left, she had a deep gash below her clavicle where Aid's knife had sliced into her. Only the hit by Nadia's dagger and the subsequent twist of her body had saved her that knife burrowing into her neck. The fall down the stairs had caused her injuries too, and she looked disheveled and weakened where she sat now. Neither Nadia nor the other ghosts would think about underestimating her, though. "Where's what?" the witch asked. "Boarding up the window?" came Harmiston's voice from inside the lab. "No ventilation in a lab? That's just bad work ethics." Carrie paused, yet didn't flinch. "The device?" "They call it a bomb," Harmiston repeated helpfully. Nadia fought hard to keep a neutral expression on her face. Now wasn't the time for laughs, considering they needed this witch to talk. "What's your name?" Carrie asked. He was standing a little to the witch's side, Barkin on the other. Despite being in pain and tied to a chair, she didn't look all that worried. Her hair was messy now, and her dark blouse couldn't hide the bloodstains. The witch gave a self-assured smile. "I'm not going to tell you that." "It's Lara, according to these documents," Harmiston said, and came out of the lab. He eased past Nadia and Aid with a bunch of papers in his arms. He put them down on the floor and began stacking them neatly so he could place them all in his satchel. "Apparently, she's been heavily involved in creating the bomb," he went on, missing Carrie's smirk at the witch. "All the references to magic in here mention her contributions. I can't quite see how something so science-based also needs her, mind you. The poison they used is native to our realm, and it is efficient, but I don't see how she's needed." "It's called magic," the witch hissed at him. "What kind of mage are you?" Harmiston glanced up. "The more bookish kind." "So Kassemyr has a witch on the payroll," Carrie said, stepping closer to her. "A Lantian one, too, judging by your accent." "What made you do it?" Lyra scoffed. "Money, you fool. What else?" "Do you know how many people have died because of what you're involved in?" "Spare me the lecture, Ghost. I could waste away in my shop in Atlantis, fiddling with guild-regulated magic. Or I could come here, get rich, and make something of myself." "It isn't just the living you've tormented," Nadia said. The witch bored her eyes into her, but Nadia wasn't worried about her using magic when she was so indisposed. "The egg. You created the spell that Tricandis needed to ensorcel a child ghost in the shade." She knew he'd gotten that magic from somewhere. "That's right," Harmiston said, remembering the case. "That was a witch's doing." "So what?" Lyra said. "That was the lost spirit of a child you enslaved," Nadia said. "Why?" Lyra shrugged by reflex and then winced in pain at the movement, breaking eye contact. "Why not? Kassemyr needed weapons. We tried many things, including harnessing the powers of the dead." Nadia bit her tongue to keep quiet. She knew Lyra spoke the truth. They had even tried controlling the Necros of the city. It had all been experiments for gaining weapons to seize control of Agartha. There was no regard for the people involved, dead or alive. "And the weapon Tricandis has? The small device? Or is that a bomb, too?" Lyra simply snorted at her and kept her mouth shut. "I'm sure that's in here, too," Harmiston said, still sorting papers on the floor. "We need to get these back," he added, and avoided mentioning exactly where back was. Carrie nodded. "We need to find the device first. The bomb, I mean." "Agreed," Harmiston said, and closed the satchel and stood. "We need that, too. We will most likely have to destroy it," Carrie said. "Yes, it's a large construction," Nadia chimed in. "We might not be able to carry it." "It?" Lyra laughed at them and instantly regretted it when her body reacted with pain. "It?" she repeated and coughed. "What makes you think there's just one?" "What?" "You're in over your heads. All of you. Did you not see how easily Kassemyr took over? He has a small army of hybrids. The bombs are not what you're up against. He can't lose this. His minions will tear you all to shreds." "They're not unbeatable," Aid said. "We have already killed a few." "And how many ghosts died in the process of killing a couple of them?" Lyra grinned viciously. "I'd wager you won't make it long in the city without being discovered." "We have 9 minutes left," Carrie said to everyone but her. They needed to get this going faster. "What is Kassemyr's plan?" he added to Lyra. The witch merely looked amused. "You're not very good at this interrogating thing, are you?" "I simply haven't gotten around to using my knife yet." Harmiston looked at Nadia with an unspoken question. Was that going to be an option? He was clearly uncomfortable with it. It would have disturbed her greatly if not. "You know what?" Lyra went on, drawing their attention again. "Since you ask so nicely, and it's not a secret anyway, I'll tell you." She pointedly looked at all of them in turn, that smug smile on her lips. "His master plan is—" She cocked her head sideways. "To take power, which he did, and then keep it, which he is doing." There was silence in the room. "Ah, look at you all. Too slow to realize it's too late. He wanted a better world for vamps, where they're not subjugated to laws meant to protect those lesser than them. They couldn't even feed the way they wanted." Lyra shook her head and clicked her tongue. "Such a mediocre fate for those meant for more." "Like you?" Barkin snarled. The laws in Agartha were what they were for a reason, to make it fair and safe for all the Queen's subjects, not just a privileged few. And certainly not vampires who fed on other sentient creatures. There were even laws against feeding on conscious animals. Vampires and other predatory species could live in Agartha, but they had to be intelligent enough to adapt and abide by those rules. Otherwise, there would be cruelty and chaos, like there was now. "Oh, absolutely like me," Lyra answered Barkin with a smile directed his way. Then she raised her hand, which was supposed to be tied behind her, and sent a burst of golden light straight for him. Barkin flew backward and crashed into the wall, toppling a cabinet in the process. Nadia inhaled and was already drawing her sword when the second wave of golden magic flew from Lyra's left hand, hitting Carrie, who was closest. Next thing, the woman's aim was directed at Harmiston. Nadia only had a split second to get there, but that was too long. She saw Harmiston raise his hand and send his bright blue magic toward her. It struck the golden force and everything crashed back. Lyra didn't fly through the room. Instead, she was pushed back and slammed so hard into the floor, Nadia barely registered it. "Harm?" she blurted. "I'm all right," he said without looking her way. He walked forward and was joined by Carrie, who'd only been struck in the shoulder and was already up from the floor again. Aid ran to tend to Barkin. Neither of them bothered with the witch at this point. What they could see, just like Nadia, was that Lyra was no longer breathing. Her chest didn't move. "Oh no," Harmiston said a few seconds later, his index and middle finger checking for a pulse. "She's dead." "There's no oh no about it, chronicler," Carrie said, and bent to check out her bindings. He yanked the rope free from under her and the chair. It had been burned right through in a highly controlled manner. "I didn't smell a thing," Nadia said, and Aid and Barkin confirmed the same. "She masked it with her magic, then," Carrie concluded. "This is on us. We were fools to not surround her on all sides while we interrogated her. We owe you thanks, chronicler," he added to Harmiston, who looked pale. He only managed a quick nod. He had clearly not meant to kill her, just stop her. Carrie looked at his watch. 5 minutes. Let's leave before the guards are supposed to meet." "And the mess we've left behind?" Harmiston asked. "Including all the witnesses?" He suddenly raised his index finger for emphasis. "Which I'm not suggesting we kill, by the way. Just so we're clear. We're all clear on that, right, guys?" All 4 ghosts smiled their tight-lipped smiles at that. Harmiston blinked hard and took a step back. "Never seen that before. That's eerily creepy." "We'll have to hope Kassemyr and his followers think we left the city immediately," Carrie explained, and left the room first. "Hope?" Harmiston said, watching them march out of the room. "Hope? That's our master plan?" Nadia reached him and nudged him on, getting him to follow the other 3. "I'm sorry you had to do that," she told him. "I'm not. She would have killed us all if she had the chance, including you." Nadia put her hand on his good shoulder and squeezed gently. "I'm still sorry about it." "Yes, well, let's focus on our leader's masterfully put-together plan of hope and enter the tunnels under the cube where likely only creatures of cruelty and despair reside." Nadia smiled warmly at him. None of the others saw since they walked ahead. "Yes, let's do exactly that." Chapter 10. "It worries me how many tunnels and how many entries there are," Nadia commented while keeping watch down the empty street. They were right outside the palace grounds now, entering the tunnels via a basement in one of the old mansions, which had historically housed peripheral members of the royal family. It was empty now. According to Carrie, it was usually occupied by an older aunt of the queen, but none of them could hear any sign of life within. Nor could either of them smell the scent of death, so they assumed she and her servants had gone elsewhere during the new reign. "The tunnels are for emergencies, like when we had to evacuate the queen and her children in a hurry," Carrie explained. "Oh, I remember. But why so many tunnels under the cube, which the Wraiths don't know about?" "Many routes mean many evacuation plans. I don't doubt it. Yet those particular tunnels lead straight between the palace and the cube, not outside. Funny that." Carrie scoffed softly, the corner of his mouth twitching. "I suppose all manner of precautions were taken when everything was built and then expanded centuries ago." "In case the Wraiths needed to be taken out?" Nadia couldn't help thinking back to the sight of all the Wraiths on the floors of the cube. "I suppose, in case the ghosts ever were to become the last defense. "The two guards are separated for a reason," Nadia said, and looked at Harmiston, who'd pulled a sheath of paper out to read. He'd mentioned that to her once, and he was right. If one of them betrayed the Queen, then it would be easier to handle the traitors if there weren't old friendships in the way. "They are," Carrie agreed and turned when Aid approached them, opening the front door. "The building is clear. Barkin found the tunnel entrance." "Then let's go," Carrie said, and opened the door wider. They followed Aid through a richly furnished house to the back area where the servants usually ruled. From there, they went down into the basement and then further down into a root cellar, which housed a small hatch in the wall behind old shelves. The air felt and smelled raw, reminding Nadia of the tunnels to the degree that she knew they were on the right way. "All right," Carrie whispered. They were too close to possible guards down there to talk loudly. It would be whispering, if that, from there on. "Here's the last of it." He reached into one of his pockets and carefully withdrew several dried, luminescent asphodels, or bland asphodels, as they were more commonly known. The ghosts had managed to bring some along into their exile, but this was the end of it. Still, to find the devices, the team had been granted this helpful weapon. Being trapped in tunnels with hybrids, werewolves, and vampires required the possibility of not being detected by their sensitive noses. Harmiston's shield had been an unexpected bonus, and Nadia felt better about their chances now than before as she crushed the flower in her hands and then let the seeds and bits rain down over herself like the others were doing. After that, they all climbed through the narrow opening in the hatch and entered a darkened tunnel that was no wider than the shoulders of a man. They all began walking in line, the dark no problem for three of them. Carrie let Aid take the lead, and Nadia kept close to Harmiston should he need her. With his shield, they made no sounds as long as they didn't speak. The spell could not silence voices. The narrow tunnel soon turned into a wider one and then another. At this point, Harmiston kept a hand on Nadia's shoulder to avoid bumping into anything. For her, the tunnels stretched out, gray and darkened, yet her half-werewolf eyes allowed her to see contours and details a human couldn't. Soon, though, they reached tunnels that were lit with, or adjacent to, electric lights, strings of wires with exposed light bulbs. The tunnels had not been built with modern Earthside technology in mind. It made it easier to see, but also to be seen, and they took care to move slowly, keep hidden, and listen and watch out for enemies at every turn and side tunnel. It was, however, not an enemy that caught their attention after walking around under the royal palace for about 15 minutes. They came to a narrow side tunnel, which seemed to swing around the cross-section of two others. It was narrower and the walls uneven. There was no light hanging from the walls or ceiling in there, but there was light there nonetheless, coming from the other tunnel. Harmiston stopped abruptly at the sight and dared a whisper. "This is it, isn't it? It looks like the sketches I found." Nadia only nodded in response. They all stood before a tank that rested upon a pedestal. The tank was cylindrical and connected to both wires and various instruments that measured who knew what. Nadia had seen it before and still had no clue. What she did see was that its contents differed from the last time she'd seen it. It was filled with remnants of a liquid, but it didn't have the glowing, silvery bluish light to it like last time. Nothing about it looked magical. The liquid, a dirty blue, was not see-through, and looked like water that had stood still for too long. It was cloudy, and there was a faint smell of charcoal in the air. It made little sense with the liquid, but then, if magic was involved, it rarely made sense. "Should we fall back?" Carrie asked her, his words barely audible. "It's not like it was when I found it. I don't think it's armed, if that makes sense." "It does," Harmiston said. "It looks depleted of all energy." Nadia frowned. "What?" "I don't think this is the one I saw." She cocked her head and studied it. "No, it definitely isn't. That one was larger. Not by much, but it was larger." "There are two," Barkin said. Remember, we found one under the cube. We weren't in this area." "Makes sense," Nadia said and nodded slowly. "It's too heavy to carry with us back, though." "Agreed," Carrie said. "We will disable them both, so they can't be reused." "What?" Harmiston's eyebrows shot up. "No. Think of all the information we're going to lose. Information you already have in your satchel, Chronicler. It will set us back, but not to zero. We can't carry 2 of these through the shade." Harmiston saw reason, but his shoulders sagged. "So get to it," Carrie added. "Me? Why don't you guys hack it into pieces with your swords? Because that level of noise will attract attention." Harmiston sighed dramatically, yet eyed the contraption, likely already considering possibilities. "I'd just like to note that you're all breaking my heart of curiosity with this order." "Noted," Carrie said, and told Aid and Barkin to keep watch on either side of Harmiston, while he and Nadia would carefully spread out a little and check the immediate area. If anyone approached, the others needed a warning so as not to be trapped in the little tunnel. Venturing outside Harmiston's shield was a challenge, but Nadia eased her amulet out and roused the Anemoy newt within. The tiny creature awoke and began moving, the turquoise light of energy emanating from it. She tucked it back behind her shirt and walked on. There wasn't much activity in the tunnels, but she could hear both movement and voices farther off. She wasn't surprised. Kassemyr and his followers had somehow figured out the tunnels existed and used them against both the wraiths and the ghosts. It stood to reason that they now used them to travel between the 2 buildings and to come and go via exits many of their enemies didn't know about. Nadia was sure the wraiths had never found out, not that it mattered now. "I do not agree," a familiar voice almost shouted from down a tunnel farther ahead. Nadia stopped and fought to control her body's reaction. Elevated breathing and pulse were not needed, despite her amulet hiding her. That had surely been Darrow's voice? "I don't care," came a sleeker, more calm voice. Kassemyr. Nadia was sure of it. She looked around, but no one was near her or even in the same tunnel she was in. Relying on her amulet and the bland asphodel, she walked toward the voices, curious and maybe a little reckless. But the agitation in their voices drew her. They disagreed on something, and she was curious as to what. "Of course you don't care. All you think about is taking power. And your blood sources." Darrow did not need to think about lowering his voice to keep hidden, and he made no effort to do so. "You told me we were in this for a bigger cause, Cass." "I did, and I meant it." "Really? Because it's bad enough you created her in the process." "Hey!" The indignation in the female voice made Nadia curious, and when she reached the entrance to the other tunnel, she carefully risked leaning in just enough to see into the crossing tunnel. There they all stood, Kassemyr, Kamra, and Darrow. The top trio of this nightmare every Agarthan lived in now. Considering one of them was an old and powerful vampire and the other 2 were hybrids, she didn't risk looking for more than the second it took to confirm who they were. She didn't stand a chance alone against them. Darrow had refrained from killing her before, mostly because he wanted to know her secret, so she didn't rely on him stopping the other 2 from severing her head from her neck. Or worse. "What?" Darrow barked at Kamra. "Nothing other than the fact that I take offense at being bad news." "We're hybrids, Kamra. We're nothing but bad news to anyone who's asked to give an opinion. But these young hybrids of yours, Cass, are a disgrace. They have no control." "Oh, so they got a bit carried away." "Carried away? 7 of the blood donors are dead. Violently so." Nadia closed her eyes and pressed her lips together. She'd known. She'd known when she'd witnessed them being herded off as food. She wasn't surprised at all, merely furious. "Mark my words. We are strong, but that won't be enough if they all rise against us." "They won't," Kamra argued. "They're too afraid," Darrow scoffed. This was supposed to be about gaining some semblance of respect, to live freely. You are too idealistic, boy, Kassemyr told him. If we were ever to be free, what did you expect? You are not a fool. That's not why I chose either of you. And the rest of them, Darrow snarled. Nadia remembered the look on his face up in the palace when Kassemyr had brought the hybrids to assist in taking power. She was sure Darrow hadn't known about them then. What she wasn't sure of was why it now seemed to upset him they were even there. He even seemed to resent Kamra's existence as a hybrid, but must have known her longer. I chose them for other purposes, Kassemyr explained, without, as it turned out, explaining anything. Return upstairs, Darrow. Cool off and focus on your duties. There was a long pause before, finally, soft footfalls sounded. Had Nadia not been a half-breed, then she might not have heard them. She didn't run. That would get her spotted before he'd crossed past the opening. Instead, she retreated into a spot between two light bulbs, the darkest place in the tunnel, and pressed herself against the wall. A moment later, she saw Darrow stalking past the opening, fists clenched and clearly in his own mind rather than focusing outward. He never saw her. Nadia chose that moment to retreat further back should the other two come the same way, but they didn't, as long as she had a view of the opening. She hurried back to the others and nodded at aid when she returned to the correct tunnel. Carrie was back too, and he was watching with interest while Harmiston was hard at work, removing wires, instruments, cogwheels, and screws. If he was going to sabotage the construction, then he was going to do it well. He was stuffing some smaller bits into his satchel and a few other things into the cloudy liquid in the tank. Anything to report? Carrie whispered to her. She nodded and told them about what she'd seen and heard, oddly relieved to be able to do so. They're disagreeing? Yes. I don't know how serious it is, though. Also, it seemed Kassemyr had to compel Tricandis to leave. Considering their talk of his creating the hybrids, I'm now certain Kassemyr is his maker. Carrie didn't disagree. It was well known that vampires could control their progenies for a long time after they sired them. Nadia had gotten a taste of that herself after Darrow had healed her with his blood, and then been in control of all her movements for a little while afterward. But he hadn't turned her into a vampire. That made all the difference for how long his hold over her had lasted. We'll bring this information back to the spymaster, Carrie said, and then nodded at Harmiston. All done? Yes. This thing won't work again without extensive repairs, and I took what I believe are bespoke and key parts. Harmiston patted the side of his satchel. Considering the fact that we also have the specs, I think it'll take them some time to repair it. Good. That's one then. Carrie turned and looked past Barkin in the direction of the cube. One more to go. Chapter 11. Barkin led the way toward the cube, following the snaking tunnels, which joined others and then others again. Nadia couldn't remember it being so many of them when she and Harm had been down there. Considering he didn't offer to help Barkin find the way, and his occasional frowns when they turned in different directions, she assumed him to only have known a few routes. The tunnels had clearly been designed as part of the structures that lay above them, and few of the passageways had the appearance of having been dug out at a later time. Those were the darkest, narrowest, and most uneven ones. They were well under the cube when movement caught Nadia's attention. Barkin was following a map in his head, attempting to recreate the way he and the other ghosts had gone the last time he'd been here. It was everyone else's job to make sure he could do that in peace. But the movement, a faint sighting of a hand moving forward, was followed by a man walking around the bend in the tunnel they were all in. The man himself was a lanky and tall fellow with a relaxed style of clothing, as opposed to his boss who wore nothing but expensive suits. Then again, Kassemyr hadn't lured any of his followers in by promising them wealth. The man, or rather vampire, stopped abruptly at the close approach of 4 ghosts. His eyes instantly turned ice blue at the sight. Nadia didn't hesitate, but reached for the little pouch on Carrie's belt and yanked it free before he could react. Then she flung it toward the vamp, still holding onto the pouch itself and letting the contents spill. Silver dust flew in a glittering cloud straight for the vamp, who was attempting to shift into his vampiric form while opening his mouth to shout simultaneously. The silver dust hit his face before he could do either, and he drew in a breath filled with silver. The transformation stopped and a choking noise sounded, rather than a vampiric shriek. Everything continued at a breakneck pace after that. Nadia felt Barkin's hand clamp around her forearm before he pulled her back, out of reach of the floating silver dust. Aid and Carrie went forward, straight for the vampire, daggers drawn, not their swords. The vampire never stood a chance. Harmiston's magic was faster than the ghosts and aimed between them. There was a flash of blue and the vampire was slammed to the ground before the two ghosts were on him, one dagger slicing through its throat, the other piercing through its heart. It wasn't until the body smoldered away while Aid and Carrie backed off that Nadia realized the vamp hadn't made a sound. Too late, she noticed the charred remains of an amulet around the beast's neck, before the intense heat of the controlled fire consumed everything, even the poor anemoy newt which had protected the vamp. The ideas and power Kassemyr had promised this creature wasn't doing him any good now. Carrie looked from Nadia and Barkin to the still floating silver in the air in front of them. "We can try to skirt around this tunnel and find you some other way," she offered. "No," Carrie said. "We shouldn't split up, but we need you both unharmed by that silver. Maybe we can cover you somehow?" "I can probably fix this," Harmiston volunteered. He focused on the silvery cloud, which was slowly falling. Too slow for the team, though. "I smell a faint scent of blood," Nadia said with a look at Aid and Barkin. She couldn't see much on their dark clothes, but it was there. The bland asphodel wasn't always effective against added scents after application. "Unavoidable," the latter said. He was right about that. Hopefully the faint scent wouldn't be too much of a problem. The only reason this vamp had surprised them was that he'd been completely silent himself. Most vamps were, but not all were equally powerful or skilled. This one seemed to have been given a little help, just like the werewolf Nadia had gotten her amulet from. "This should do it," Harmiston said, moving his hand in an elegant little flourish. The silver dust began floating sideways into a condensed cloud, which then fell to the ground, covering the charcoal left from the dead vampire. It subdued the smell somewhat, but not entirely. "Great work," Carrie nodded his approval. "Anything Meiji you can't do, Chronicler?" Aid added. "Be silent, at least according to my brothers, and my mother and—" Carrie clapped a hand on his shoulder and stared him forward. "Let's get moving. We can't hide the remnants of this creature. We don't have much time before we need to exit these tunnels." Carrie let go of Harmiston, took charge and led the way, following Barkin's silent directions. He was right. Nadia's swift reaction had silenced the vamp's screams, and no sound had escaped from the quick fight. That didn't mean someone wouldn't come along and smell the fresh charcoal and bone fragments. Nadia followed them and took a breath with some trepidation, but she needn't worry. No silver particles entered her lungs. Thankfully, it didn't take long before they found the other bomb. They walked about 3 tunnels over and then found the other one hidden in a smaller side tunnel, just like the first one. This one was also filled with cloudy blue-gray liquid, rather than the glowing silvery force Nadia had seen in Kassemyr's home. She stared at it in silence, not taking note of what Harmiston was doing where he hunkered down to take some of the components apart. This was the device that had taken out the wraiths and rendered them helpless. It was still almost inconceivable to think of them as such, but this had been the case on that fateful day. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, and she turned around fast. Judging by the stiff postures of the other ghosts, they heard it too. It was the sound of someone who wasn't afraid to be heard, and there were many of them. Nadia looked back and saw that Harmiston had stopped working. His shield was what protected them from being discovered now. "I can't stand it. What's done is done," Nadia frowned. It was the voice of Kamra. A most useful outlook on life, as it were, Kassemyr responded, and then sighed heavily. Oh, how I wish to slumber in these daylight hours, rather than handle these matters. Carrie sent Nadia an unspoken question, and she mouthed their names to him. Kassemyr and Kamra must have walked over toward the cube on some errand after sending Darrow off. Was it not you who once told me that the slumber is a weakness? Kamra asked her master, or chided him. Her voice was sharp, and Nadia couldn't quite interpret how much deference she had for him. For a hybrid, my dear. For me, it strengthens me. We are the same, and yet not quite. I can't argue with that, the hybrid said. But what I am about to argue with you full on is that miserable... Now, Kamra. He's stepping out of line, Cass. Yes, I am aware of this. Now is not the time. We've only barely solidified our hold on the city. The shade is ours. My hybrids can take the terrors it bestows upon them. The people are a hair's breadth away from rioting because of the blood sacrifices, and now 7 of them were brutally killed because your hybrids are shaken from so much time in the shade. Enough! Kassemyr shouted at the woman who undoubtedly stood right next to him. I'm aware that Darrow has grown restless, reckless, and defiant. Are you going to do anything about it? No. Come on, Cass. You are, my dear. There was a pause, and Nadia shared a look with Carrie, who seemed as engrossed with the conversation as she was. Tell me what to do. Darrow, my dear Tricandis, has always been too focused on fusing his blessedly tormented mind back together, instead of following in your path and moving with the tumultuous swings of yours. He holds on to too much. It's time he was taught a lesson about such weaknesses. I agree. Of course you do, Kamra. I removed all such weaknesses when you came demanding your release or death after your making. And look what happened to you. I grew stronger. Better. Exactly. What do you want me to do? Take what matters most to him. Remove her from his life as punishment for his disobedience. He will fall in line again when he has no one but us. Very well, Kamra said and added a few more things, but Nadia didn't catch any of it. She barely registered Carrie's mouthed "you" to her and slowly shook her head. Nadia was not who mattered most to Darrow. Frankly, she didn't think anyone mattered to him. But then, it was a hard truth to realize that Kassemyr knew him better than she did now. 9 years had passed. 9 years where Darrow had likely had no one but Kassemyr, and eventually Kamra. People he didn't even seem to like. If this she wasn't Nadia, though, then who? An icy dread curled around her heart at the thought of her daughter. Harmiston seemed to pick up on it because he hurried over to her. If not for his shield cloaking their noises, he would have given them away then, but Nadia didn't care. The worry on his face when he realized what she must be thinking was almost palpable. Nilofar, she whispered, the name barely audible. Her mind reeled, and she closed her eyes a moment, feeling Harmiston hold her hand. She hadn't even registered him taking it in his. Years of training among the Wraiths was what staved off her panic. She's going after Nilofar, she told Harmiston, ignoring the unspoken yet somehow loud questions on Carrie's and the other 2's faces. Do you mean? Harmiston asked her, pausing at the right time to keep his promise to never reveal her daughter's name to anyone. No, his mother. Whose? Darrow's mother. They're going to kill her. We can't do anything about that, Carrie said. Nadia turned her head to look at him, and the world became clear again. She heard nothing but silence from the neighboring tunnels, which meant that Kassemyr and Kamra both had moved on. Otherwise, Carrie wouldn't have risked whispering. She's innocent. The mother of a hybrid? She didn't make him a hybrid, and she took me in when my brother and I had no one. She let go of Harmiston's hand. I need to go to her. Now, before it's too late. You will follow orders and stay here, Sentinel. Nadia stared at Carrie. I can't. She's innocent. And what kind of ghosts stands by and watches a crime like that? We have our orders. They outweigh the safety of one. This is about the entire city, not one hybrid's mother. A werewolf, Nadia countered. Don't try to stop me, Carrie, she told him. I am going. You can finish up here without me. She had no doubt of that. She'd seen them in action plenty of times this day, and trusted them to keep Harmiston safe, and to go back to Fallen Oaks with all the knowledge they'd accumulated. Sentinel, you need to stop with this kind of talking, Carrie warned. Aid and Barkin drew closer to him, on both sides of Nadia to prevent her from leaving. She didn't have time for this. Neither did Harmiston, as it turned out. Having gotten the hang of his various defensive powers, he moved fast, his hands out, freezing all 3 ghosts in place. Harm? He looked at her with an apologetic smile. What are they going to do? I can't be fired from the ghosts, and let's be honest, I probably won't have a chronicler position if we ever get through this anyway. She began and faltered. You really should go, Nad. I can't hold them forever. I'll wait for you to get back to a safe place. You know where. She wanted to say so many things at that, but the sight of the struggling ghosts, who would no doubt soon be free, made up her mind for her. There was no time to think things through. All that mattered was Nilofar's safety. She needed to get to her before Kamra found her. Thank you, Harm, she said, and walked away from them. Sentinel Nadia, I'm warning you, Carrie said. You will regret this. Not as much as I'll regret not doing it. Chapter 12. The Anemoy newt in Nadia's amulet protected her where she jogged through the tunnels. Without Harmiston or Barkin as guides, she relied on what she remembered from the times she'd been in there before, and what she'd seen that day. She hurried but couldn't simply run. Kassemyr's people were down there, and she needed to see them before they noticed her. The minutes wasted while hiding gnawed at her, but she would be of no use to Nilofar if she got caught here. Finally, after navigating the tunnels, she found her way to the pump house in the Cube Garden, where she and Harmiston had entered through the last time they'd been here. She neither heard nor smelled anything that hinted of a nearby presence, and slipped out of the small structure. The sky above reflected the late afternoon sun from up on the surface, the mages still at work in the spellbound halls. Nadia kept low, and moved swiftly between flowers and trimmed hedges, minding to not be seen from the palace, but she was already at a great distance. Soon, she left the garden and entered the streets of the city. There, she picked up speed and began to run. She needed to get to Calmont Hollow first. Darrow hadn't had any contact with his mother for years, not since shortly after he was turned by Kassemyr. Technically, there shouldn't be any reason to use Nilofar against him, but Nadia knew he had kept some tabs on her. He'd known that Nadia had visited her lately, and that she'd taken in a couple of former wraiths. She couldn't take a chance on Kassemyr not knowing this. She herself knew how old relationships were hard to keep secret. The streets, much like earlier in the day, were quiet and almost deserted. People were too scared and cautious to go outside. Nadia only saw a few in the distance, probably returning from or going to work. Besides them, the guards were out in their smaller groups acting nauseating and tormenting people by going up to their houses and pretending to want to break in. Their obnoxious behavior and howling laughter at least warned Nadia of their whereabouts, and she passed 2 such groups with ease before entering Calmont Hollow. The buildings near Nilofar's shop still showed the damage from the silver grenades Kassemyr's followers had used the day they took the city. Blown-out windows and doors were boarded up. The dead had been removed, but brick and mortar still lay in the streets. Silver glinted in the afternoon sun in broken walls. No one wanted to be outside and risk the torment of the guards. Nadia saw Nilofar's shop and hurried to cross the street she was on. 30 more seconds, and another crossing, and she would be there. She needed to get Nilüfer to leave. There was no time for anything else. She'd take her to Nikolai at once. Nadia was already going over the necessary words in her mind because she knew the older woman would argue. She couldn't possibly leave her shop or call Mont Hollow, but Nadia needed to be firm and direct. There wasn't even time to pack. She was sure of it. They couldn't take any chances. She reached back and tightened her ponytail when she saw the boarded-up door to Nilüfer's shop slam open. She halted more because of the cracking sound than anything. If the windows hadn't already been blown out, she thought they would have broken at this disturbance. The angered, almost blurry movements of a vampire. A male vampire. In the sun. Nadia inhaled sharply, her amulet masking the noise. Then she reacted and stepped back into the shadows of the large porch stairs to the building behind her. The vampire shifted back to his human form, his brown hair slightly disheveled like he'd been in a hurry, his dark eyes intense in his angered, emotional state. Nadia had no trouble seeing it even from a small distance. This was Tracandis, not Darrow. "Kamra!" he bellowed, his voice echoing between the buildings of Kal Mont Hollow, the place where he'd been born and had spent his childhood. Nadia could hear hushed voices from within the nearest buildings before everyone turned quiet. They might be werewolves in there, but contrary to most beliefs, werewolves weren't all prone to violence, especially when the terror of Agartha was screaming in their street. "Show yourself, you coward," he added, looking around, mostly up. "I know you're here watching." Nadia stared in stunned disbelief. In all her encounters with him since he came back, she hadn't seen this level of emotion in him, not even when they'd fought. This reminded her of the young and broken Tracandis, not the older and slightly calmer version he was now. "Kamra!" he roared. "Oh, calm yourself," the female hybrid shouted back. Next thing, Nadia saw her descending the wall of a building on the same side of the street as she was. The hybrid was in her human form, but seemed to half climb, half levitate, breaking every natural law. "I am going to kill you," Darrow shouted at her. "I'll rip your throat out." "Oh, you say the sweetest things, don't you, you fool?" Kamra said, landing on the sidewalk in a crouch before straightening slowly, purposefully. Her red hair was gathered in a tight braid, and she was dressed in dark, plain clothes. You needed to be taught a lesson. "A lesson? Keep quiet and follow orders without questions. There are always so many questions." Kamra sounded exasperated. "You're a dead lackey," Darrow said, his voice suddenly lowered, the ice in it snapping Nadia out of her shock at this unexpected confrontation. Before she could process what was happening, Darrow ran forth, shifting to his werewolf form mid-stride and bounding straight for Kamra. Like Darrow, her shift happened fast, too, and she met him head-on in the middle of the street, her wolf slightly smaller, but not by much. The barks, growls, yelps, strikes, and blows were all that could be heard as the two beasts crashed together, clearly aiming to kill each other. Their shapes blurred in a way werewolves didn't. They suddenly changed forms, the waxy dead faces of their vampiric forms taking over. Darrow and Kamra didn't need the street to hash out their differences. They climbed the walls around them, jumping at each other, kicking each other into long falls no one else could survive. Nadia stared in disbelief when Darrow, much like his maker could, levitated and jumped up 3 floors in a controlled jump, catching Kamra, who climbed with barely touching the walls. He grabbed her jacket and pulled her back, slamming her into a fire escape 2 floors below. It took the powerful hybrid no more than a second to get up and attack him. Nadia's attention strayed to Nilüfer's shop. What was going on? It had to be bad. Kamra and Darrow had both gotten here before her, which meant Kamra knew exactly where Darrow's mother lived. Kassemyr certainly hadn't told her down in the tunnels. The battling hybrids further down the street were too much for one lone ghost, but Nadia had more important matters to tend to than her own safety. She needed to cross the street and enter that shop, and now was the best time. Darrow and Kamra were actively trying to murder each other in a manner that told Nadia they had never been friends, merely the experiments of a cruel vampire, a tormented and shared fate neither had asked for. Taking a chance, Nadia ran forth from the shadows and sprinted across the street. She hurried down the steps to the shop and entered through the boarded-up door which now hung on its hinges after Darrow's treatment of it. Nadia rested her back against the doorframe a moment, listening for the approach of one or both of the hybrids. There was nothing but the noise from their desperate and hateful fight. Things broke out there, crashing to the ground below. Nadia could only hope they didn't end up killing innocent people. That was when she truly noticed the state of the shop. There had been glass and overturned display cases the last time she'd been in there, but of course that shouldn't be the case now, over a week later. The brutal sounds of the fight outside turned to background noises. Nadia moved away from the door and saw the shop in a different light. This mess did not come from the initial attack on Calmont Hollow. Of course not. Nilüfer would have cleaned that up the moment things calmed down and her leg had healed from the silver fragments that had hit her. She'd had the place boarded up to prevent thieves and rodents alike from entering. That was exactly what Nilüfer would do. Keep everything in order. Now, though, her wares lay strewn everywhere. Blades that would be a danger lay out in the open, inviting people to step on them. Glass from the display cases that had survived the explosion now lay scattered on the floor. Furniture was toppled over. Nadia fought to keep her breathing even, but she couldn't ignore the smell of blood. "Nilüfer?" she asked, her voice subdued. She felt like a child at that moment, calling for her protector, her caretaker, against hope. Nadia walked further, seeing the signs of the fight that had so clearly taken place in there. She could sense the faint smell of a werewolf and the pungent smell of the blood of a vampire. Nilüfer had gotten her claws in. The front desk was not toppled over but stood askew, the till on the floor. Nadia found her behind it. Nilüfer had changed back into her human form before her life had ended. She lay on her back, her eyes open, yet unseeing. Her hair lay around her head like a dark crown. It had not been touched by the blood which had spilled from her ripped throat. Nadia saw scratches on her arms and legs, her clothes torn, a deep gash in her abdomen. Nilüfer had fought hard before Kamra had taken her life. Given the happenings outside, she had no doubt which hybrid had done this, which meant Kamra had known all along where Nilüfer lived and run here the moment Kassemyr had told her to. That hybrid had known because she'd waited for this chance against Nilüfer's son. Nadia had never stood a chance against the speed of the hybrid. She closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten her hard-fought composure. She couldn't break down now. What would Nilüfer say? That thought almost broke her, but the faintest of creaks from further inside the space had her draw her sword before she'd fully turned around. "Oh!" a young, dark-clad wraith said, and raised his one unarmed hand in a non-threatening gesture. "Shadow, we mean no harm." Nadia blinked, suddenly filled with rage, longing to kill Kamra herself, but years of control and self-discipline stopped her from doing something unforgivable to someone who just happened to be nearby. She stared at the boy for a beat. "Kurik?" she said then, her voice raspy and hard. "Yes, Shadow, Sentinel?" He cocked his head a moment, taking in her dark blue outfit. Nadia leaned sideways and saw Peyra, his pregnant girlfriend, behind him. She had a sword in one hand and a dagger in the other. They must have been drawn downstairs by the noise. "You need to go upstairs and keep quiet," she told them. "We did. Nilüfer ordered us to," Kurik said, "because of the baby. But the hybrid—" He shook his head. Nadia pressed her lips together a moment. Nilüfer was right. She looked down at her again, but the sight was too much. Nadia felt a lump in her throat she couldn't handle right now. Peyra stepped closer to Kurik and looked over his shoulder. "Oh, Nilüfer," she uttered and dropped her dagger when she held her hand over her mouth. Then she shook her head too and gathered herself, like the former wraith she was. Nadia glanced past her and saw that the back room was in disarray too. That was odd. The fight had never reached that far since Nilafar lay dead behind her counter. Nadia lowered her sword and waved the young couple aside. They complied without a word, clearly more worried about the noise coming from outside still. Nadia, though, stared into the little back room. The door which led to the back stairs was open. This was the only inconsequential thing since Peyra and Kurik had come down from there. But the furniture was not overturned or moved in any significant way indicating an altercation had happened there. No, Nilafar's cup of coffee still stood on the table, next to the box with her family photos from the Earthside realm. Nadia would recognize the metal container anywhere. That included the photos of Nell and the grown-ups in her life. Nadia didn't know if Nilofer ever got that magical spell to lock the box, but in the end, it hadn't mattered since it had been open when an attack had happened. "Half of them are missing," she whispered, unable to stop the fear from showing on her face. "What?" Kurik asked behind her. By the time she'd turned around, there was nothing to see on her face. "Please take care of Nilafar," she told the couple. "Of course. But where are you going?" "Outside," she told them, and pushed past them, out of the back room. "You can't go there. Besides, we need you. We need an adult wraith." "I'm not a wraith." "A ghost, then." "It doesn't matter anymore," Peyra chimed in. "We all need a leader." Nadia shook her head. "I need to kill someone before he does something stupid. Please take care of Nilafar," she asked again, not knowing if she'd ever make it back to do so herself. The young couple looked at her with pleading faces, but finally nodded, seeing her resolution. "Of course. Anything for her," Kurik said. "Thank you both," she said, and then ran out of the shop, straight into the street. The screech of a vampire tore through the air, and Nadia stopped in the middle of the street just as a vampire, Kamra judging by the clothes, fell from a nearby building and hit the ground with a sickening thud. Next thing, the hulking form of Darrow's werewolf landed next to her. Kamra groaned and changed back into her human form. Nadia could see the wounds more clearly on her body then. Darrow wasn't unscathed either. There was a definite limp where he took the final steps toward the other hybrid. Kamra eased up on her elbows about to say something, but Darrow swung his clawed hand and ripped her throat open so blood gushed to all sides. Nadia's breath hitched, and she stared open-mouthed. Darrow changed back into his human form and stared down at the dead hybrid, breathing hard. He too had gashes and wounds on his body. Then he turned his gaze on Nadia. She knew she hadn't made a sound. He couldn't smell her either because of the bland asphodel which still protected her. But she was visible, and she was clearly not who Darrow wanted to see. His eyes were unforgiving, darker, and more manic than usual. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a piece of paper. No, not that. A photo. Nadia didn't need to see the motif to know what it was. He knew. He knew about Nell, her secret, which he knew she'd kept from him. And now, it was all so clear. Darrow dropped the photo on the ground, and without a word, he changed into his vampiric form and ran away from Kamra without a backward glance. He leaped and arose in the air before taking hold halfway up the building, climbing up and running over the roof, in the direction of the shade. "No!" Nadia gasped and began running without thinking. She knew where he was going, and she knew she couldn't keep up. How much family was she going to lose in one day? Chapter 13. Nadia's whole world filled with dread. Darrow knew about Nell, and his sudden running away meant he was after her, not going home to the maker who'd had his mother executed to keep him in line. Darrow knew. Her worst nightmare come to life. She'd feared this moment for 9 years. Nadia swallowed hard and began running in the same direction Darrow had toward the shade. If he was to find Nell, he needed to leave this realm. Nadia didn't care about the guards. The sun was going down soon. which meant that vampires would join the werewolves in tormenting the citizens of Agartha. None of it mattered to Nadia at that point. She needed to get to her child first. Darrow had to be stopped from taking Nell away and likely killing Nikolai and Axel in the process. She had needed to get to Nilafar first, too. A sense of hopelessness threatened to stop her before she had even lost, but that was neither the way of the wraiths nor the ghosts. It was not Nadia's way. She hadn't kept all those secrets for so long by giving up. Her daughter had been safe all that time. Giving up was not an option, but Darrow was a hybrid. Keeping up with him was an impossibility. Nadia ran down an almost empty street, surprising a few citizens who had not expected to see a ghost running past. The frightened expressions told her they were no threats, and that they feared what she was running from, hurrying back into their homes. If only they knew she was running toward dread and pain unimaginable if she didn't get there first. Kamra had known exactly where to go to find Nilafar, and Nadia had never had a chance. Darrow didn't know exactly where Nell was. That was Nadia's only hope in her desperate run through the streets of Agartha. A shout barked hard and loud from a street over didn't deter her. She kept on running, one hand on the hilt of her sword to keep it steady, the other arm pumping hard in rhythm with her fast pace. She wanted to give even more, but knew to pace herself to be able to keep the speed for a prolonged time. The sound of raised voices somewhere behind her drew a part of her attention, the part which wasn't imagining the horror of Nell disappearing from her life forever. As a wraith, Nadia had faced many terrorizing creatures and situations, but nothing compared to this. Her Nell meant so much more than her own safety. "You there!" someone shouted, voice angered. "Stop!" Nadia didn't comply. Instead, she considered how long she could outrun the werewolves on her tail. She was certain that's who they were. It would still be a few minutes before the vampire guards would come out into the streets. She knew she could reach the shade without the wares catching up, but once inside the shade, she would face a bigger threat from the hybrids who guarded the border there. A large truck caught her eye further down the street she was in. It was one of the trucks from the Royal Garage, the driver likely inside the shop it was parked next to. Whatever goods he was appropriating, Nadia decided he could walk and carry it. She made a run for the truck and climbed into the cab. The keys were missing, but that had never stopped neither a wraith nor a ghost. Hot-wiring the clunky vehicle took a couple of seconds. The engine turned in a rumble and she hit the gas, taking a hard turn off the sidewalk. At this point, she saw the werewolves in the side mirrors. They had shifted and bounded after the truck. She didn't care. Her focus was only on stopping Darrow from reaching her daughter. The truck accelerated, and she heard a thump as something, or someone, hit it on the side. The werewolves, no doubt. She checked the mirrors and saw a couple of them hanging onto the sides of the truck. She didn't have time for this. Nadia swung hard to both sides and smashed into other cars and buildings. A howl of pain entered the noisy cab, and she saw one wolf fall to the road, then the other. After that, she went straight ahead, toward the looming shade which arose further ahead. She was driving straight for the main checkpoint with no care of who was waiting there. A blurry movement to her left had her move her upper body forward, never straying from her course. The glass broke and flew all around her, a furry fist following and narrowly missing her. A loud growl of frustration followed. It was a third werewolf who'd gotten onto the truck, the roof most likely, the only place she couldn't see in her mirrors. The werewolf withdrew his fist, but she was sure it would come again. She took her left hand off the steering wheel and drew her dagger. Next thing, the werewolf swung forward to see inside the cab properly. Nadia took her attention off the street for a split second. Before the were could even open his fanged mouth to bite down on her, she stabbed her dagger right into the beast's left eye. The truck hit an empty newspaper cart and shook violently, while Nadia yanked her dagger free in a shaky and not clean move. The werewolf howled again and lost its grip, falling from the vehicle and crashing into the street. The truck shook as it drove over something, and Nadia was off with no care about what had happened to the werewolf. She drove faster, knowing that the moment she entered the shade, the hybrids guarding the old Wraith checkpoints would be onto her. Truck or no truck, they would be on her like fleas, the speed of the vehicle merely a challenge, not an impossibility for them. She took a last turn to the right, and there it was, the border between the city proper and the shade. The dingy, yellowish light lay over the desolate landscape in front of her like a clingy fog. Mentally, she prepared herself and pressed the gas pedal fully down. From here on, the route was straight ahead except for a house or two in her way. The checkpoint came up, but no one stepped forward to stop her. Nadia frowned but didn't stop to check it out. Her attention was on the area all around her and the side mirrors. It wasn't until she passed through that she saw 2 bodies on the ground. They lay on either side of the truck, their throats ripped open, blood everywhere. Then she was through, and drove on in her mad chase of someone who was too fast. Darrow must have killed the guards, too riled up and angry to stop and be let through with only a few questions anyway. It told her everything she needed to know about his state of mind at that point. This was not who she wanted in her daughter's life. There was nothing stable about Tracandis. The truck moved steadily through the shade, shaking only slightly. It had been built for this, to bring trading goods into the city from the gateways by the wall. Nadia noticed another fallen hybrid halfway to the wall. A wandering guard had suffered the same fate as those back at the checkpoint. The only thing Nadia was grateful for was that it showed her the way. Tracandis left the most terrifying trail. She reached the wall without incident. She hardly even noticed the incessant torment of the shade. Despite her fears being the perfect fodder for it, her determination to not lose her daughter left her mind oddly blank. She hit the brakes and stopped right in front of the wall which loomed over her now. A large gate shimmered and glowed in the rock wall, with various small ones around it. Nadia opened the door and jumped out, leaving the engine running. She didn't have time to be subtle, nor had Darrow, she figured. She knew where the largest gate led and had to take a chance on Darrow having used it already. So far, his reckless kills of hybrids had let her follow him with certainty. Now she needed to rely on luck. There was no time to think it through. He had too much of a head start, as well as abnormal speed, for her to waste time. Besides, another hybrid could come by soon. Nadia ran forth and straight into the shimmering silver-green gateway. Instead of crashing into the wall behind it, she stepped into another realm. Humid air and heat hit her at once. Darkness engulfed her, and despite the darkened light in the shade, her eyes needed a second to adjust. Her werewolf half saved her time in that regard. She looked up and saw she was indeed close to one wall of an enormous canyon. Far to her right lay a vast city with a monolithic stepped pyramid at its center. Atlantis was a busy city, something all its twinkling lights in the night testified to. "Guardians!" Nadia shouted, startling a few other people nearby who were coming and going through other gateways in the canyon wall nearby. "On my way," a man said, a strain to his voice at being hurried. A large, heavily muscled man in light armor approached her. He had a frown on his face, especially when he noticed her clothing. Around his neck hung a small medallion, a protection granted the guardians of the Lantian border against magical attacks. Nadia had wished over the years that the Wraiths could have had those, but this was a Lantian secret they didn't share. "I didn't hear you there," the guardian said, and stopped next to her, his hand resting seemingly casually on the hilt of his sword. "I move quietly," she told him, not interested in expounding on the magical amulet which facilitated this. "What can I help you with, then? Are you entering the city, or passing through? I see you're an Agarthan ghost." Nadia nodded to confirm his assumption. This was the main gateway between Atlantis and Agartha, after all, but where she was going depended on Darrow. "I believe an Agarthan passed through here no more than half an hour ago, and I'm sure you know of the situation in our realm. I am on the official business of Queen Isona of Agartha." The lie came with ease. She'd had so much practice over the years. "I only require entering the city if he stayed here." The person in question might have looked human to you, but he is in fact a werewolf-vampire hybrid. Such creatures were rare in any realm, but since the Guardian gave her a quick nod at this, she knew news of the Agarthan situation had reached this realm too. They likely had spies in Agartha, just like the Agarthans had here. I had one male pass through here right before you. It's why I wasn't at my station when you arrived. Where did he travel then? If the Guardian had left his post for a short time, it was likely to direct a traveler to another gate. Entering Atlantis was difficult and required any travelers to register properly. That was done right by the gates upon arrival. I understand that there are tumultuous times in your realm now, Ghost, but Atlantis is not taking part in it. We'll allow a servant of the Agarthan Queen to pass through on her business, but that is all until diplomatic channels say otherwise. Understood. Nadia felt impatience eat at her. I will merely pass through the same way this criminal did. Very well, the big man said and turned, beckoning her to follow. He was looking for a place called Usul or something like that. Never heard of it. I had to search the archives to find a suitable gateway. It's in the Earthside realm. This was sickening news. Why had she never considered how much information was on those photos, besides the people she loved? The name of the city had probably popped up in the background on many of them. Yes, it is not somewhere people travel to. No, that was the point. Or it had been until now. Nadia followed the Guardian to the wall opposite the one she'd come through herself. Then they walked up 3 flights of stairs before he guided her past many openings to the mines, which produced so much of the minerals the Lanteans traded in. Here we are, the Guardian finally said, and showed her a shimmering opening through the veil she had to bend down to pass through. It wasn't as strong, but that only told her it led to the magicless Earthside realm. Thank you, she told him, and simply went through. She didn't have time for more pleasantries. The air cooled around her, and she almost lost her footing before she instinctively grabbed onto slippery stone and just managed to not fall down an outcrop of bedrock in a slightly wooded area. For a moment, panic nearly gripped her. This was not in the city, but then her dampened senses picked up on the nearby noises of car engines, and the flickering lights of the city appeared to her between the trees. She was simply in a rocky little part overlooking the city where no one had built anything. Nadia eased herself down from the outcrop and got her feet on the ground. She glanced up and saw the faint shimmer which looked like light was reflected from the city. Then she walked out from among the trees and saw that she was in the right place. Sort of. The city of Oslo spread out before her, further down. She hadn't known about this gateway. Darrow had done the smart thing in going to Atlantis and using the Lantean knowledge of the gateways leading to and from their city. It had cost him time. She'd probably gained some time since the Guardian had already known where to send her. But try as she might, she could not smell Darrow anywhere here, though she knew he must have passed through. She didn't know how fast he was in this realm. His dual heritages had to be subdued here too. But by how much? As she began her descent to the city below, knowing exactly where her family was, the city seemed so close, and yet so painfully far. Chapter 14. Usually, when Nadia traveled to this city, she felt like the distance from the gateway she used was a short one. Now it felt so far. She'd passed through the veil to another gateway she hadn't known about. She thought it was placed near older settlements of the city, just like the gateway down by the ruins of the old town, but she knew, objectively, that it wasn't far. Still, she ran down a steep decline toward a motorway. She could see the area with the familiar ruins ahead, but needed to cross the various lanes of the road first. Nadia Navarra was an agile ghost, and she ran between cars, easily avoiding them, yet spooking the drivers nonetheless. She was followed by honks and didn't care. All she saw before her mind's eye was the path she needed to run now. Darrow had to search. Nadia knew where to go. She could do this. She knew she could. Nadia pushed herself, sprinting past the ruins and along the pathway next to the water. So close. She drew more attention than she usually would have liked from passers-by. Her speed and attire attracted their curious gazes. The sword at her hip made a few step back while others didn't. From earlier trips to this realm, she'd experienced how many people often thought the wraiths wore costumes. Why should the ghosts be seen any differently? There was no time to consider it beyond a fleeting thought, anyway. A minute spent hiding her blades could be what stood between her and the safety of her family. Asphalt, and then paved flat stones guided her on. She saw the high-rises placed in a long row. Nikolai had worked hard to buy an apartment there. It was where her heart lived. Nadia rounded the last corner and saw two familiar figures further in, bent over something. Axel and Nell, doing some sort of experiment, she thought. Then her brain registered the other presence, standing still at the corner of the other building which stood parallel to the one she had come from. The sight of Darrow made her feel like she'd come here on a winter's day, not a relatively warm evening. She shivered and then controlled herself. With Axel and Nell in her sight, she walked over to him, purposefully, determinedly. He hadn't had to search for long. The photos truly had held more information than she thought. "Darrow," she said, her voice low so as not to be heard by the other two. People were walking by on the street right behind them, too. No need to draw unwanted attention from anyone. Darrow stood, rigid and attentive, staring straight at the two. "What is it they're doing, you think?" he asked her, his voice equally low. It was hard to read his emotions now. He'd locked them down after leaving Calmont Hollow. Nadia stopped next to him and faced him, yet she looked over while watching him out of the corner of her eye. She had no idea how strong he was here, but she doubted he was reduced to a complete human since even she retained a fraction of her heightened senses. "A science experiment," she told him. Axel was pointing at some things, and Nell was on her knees, working to blend the ingredients into a tiny yellow and rounded container. She also took notes in a small notebook while doing this. Homework, I suppose. They usually do these things outside here, where there's more room and not too many people. Darrow nodded. Nadia drew a deep breath, feeling her heart pound fast both from the running she'd done and the situation itself. For once, she didn't feel the need to control everything, to mask it all. Her emotions might as well be showing because they mattered now. She wasn't going to hide how important that girl was to her. Nell was wearing a green t-shirt, a black skirt, and black leggings, her dark hair braided into pigtails. She looked exactly like the child she was, innocent and curious. "She doesn't deserve our lives," Nadia told Darrow. He took his eyes off the pair and stared right at Nadia. There was no mania in them now, only what seemed like clear-headed alertness. "You kept this from me. This is your lie." Yes. What else was there to say? For the first time in almost a decade, there was no more need for secrets, half-truths, and lies. "When?" "I found out before you returned. And you never told me?" The outrage in his voice was controlled, kept down, simmering. "At first, I couldn't. I planned to, but all the bolts were taken to boot camp in another realm. When we returned and I could get away, you were gone. You should have told me, Nad." "Maybe so. But when we returned a couple of months later, you had sunk into your madness, terrorizing the city. People were killed, so... No, at that point I had no reason to tell you. I didn't want that for her." "Want what?" "Her dragged into your blood-filled existence. You..." "I what?" "You turning her." She swallowed hard, suppressing the despair she felt at the thought. "That's what you think I would have done, huh?" "Your mind is broken, Darrow. You had and have no business being near her." But my mother did? He took his eyes off Nell and Axel, then giving Nadia a cold look. She discarded me like I was filth. She didn't accept your choices. Choices? He took a step closer, brows lowered, a streak of malice to his lips. Nadia stood fast, but moved her hand, pointedly so, to the hilt of her sword. They drew the gaze of a woman passing by on the street, but they stood still, seemingly not paying her any attention. A moment later, she was gone, nose in her cell phone. What choices did I have? Darrow hissed at Nadia, clearly wanting to shout, and repressing that urge to still his anger-fueled curiosity. This was done to me. I didn't have a say. He drew back a little, inhaled deeply, and gave half his focus to his daughter again, while keeping a vigilant eye on Nadia. There's always a choice, Nadia argued. You could have... She stopped herself. As a wraith, she'd learned long ago to make hard choices and then live with them. But what she was suggesting now was too much. That's what you think I should have done? Ended it myself? I don't know. You had the chance to kill me in the shade and you didn't. I know. So you expect more from people than you're willing to do yourself, he concluded with a sneer. Nilafar helped me, Nadia explained. It was best to move away from subjects that didn't sit well with her. She had no right to demand such a thing from him, despite his predicament. She stepped up, and she loved my little girl from the moment she knew of her existence. We agreed you could never know about Nell, so that you'd never take her from a safe and loving home, which is exactly what she has now. They both remained silent as Nell got up, said a few words to her dad, and then threw the tiny yellow container to the ground. A white substance burst from it and flew everywhere, narrowly missing the girl, who jumped back in a squeal of giggles. I thought people in this realm were sticklers for not littering, Darrow said, surprising Nadia. It was such a non-important subject right now. They're both conscious about such things. It's likely going to rain soon. Otherwise, Axel wouldn't have let her. Axel? Her dad. He's a good father. She lacks nothing. She lacks me. Yes, Nadia said and shrugged. And me. And yet she thrives. She is safe, loved, and cared for. That's what matters most. It's more important than what either of us wants. You clearly know her. I do, but I remained in Agartha to make sure you never found out, which turned out to be the right decision. You've been hounding me since you came back. Because I knew there was no chance you'd break ties with me back then so easily. It was so out of character. You are loyal to a fault, Nadia. I've said it before, and I mean it. It's your greatest strength and a weakness. Well, I'm only a half-breed. We're nothing but weaknesses. Stop that, Darrow snapped, strangely coming to her defense. Your half-breed status is not to blame for your lies. You should never have kept this from me. Oh, but I should, she said, and stepped so close there were only a few centimeters between them. Her hand clamped around the hilt. You best believe I am being serious right now, Darrow. I would never let Tricandis near my daughter. I may be weakened here, but so are you, and I will kill you before you take her away. Do you hear me? I will fight you with everything I have, and that includes my life. I don't care what it costs me, but I will stop you before you go near her. Nilofar and I swore to each other to keep her safe, and I am keeping to that pact even though your choices, which you do have, ended up taking her away from me today. Away from Nell. How am I going to tell my daughter about that? Darrow breathed hard, staring forward at nothing. Then he turned his head and eyed Nadia in silence for a few beats. Your daughter, he scoffed and shook his head. My mother is dead because she didn't fight back properly. Stop it! I saw your hurt and anger when you exited her shop. You tore Kamra to shreds for that. Don't pretend you didn't care. Nilofar fought hard and lost because what was sent to kill her was an abomination that shouldn't exist. I, on the other hand, am a ghost. Don't simply expect to beat me." She was dead serious and hid nothing on her face from the man with whom she had once shared a youthful and innocent love. None of that remained, only the remnants of the connection they'd had, but enraging him and threatening to kill him wasn't the way to go. She didn't want a fight here outside her family's home, not unless it was unavoidable. "You didn't do as Kassemyr told you earlier. He ordered you to leave, and yet you were there shortly after Nilüfar's murder. How do you—" He started laughing, soft like a chuckle, while shaking his head. "You were in the tunnels." "I'm a ghost now. I had duties, but that's beside the point. Kassemyr doesn't control you anymore, does he?" "I overheard them, yes," Darrow confirmed. "He has no hold over me. He hasn't for a long time." "So you do have choices," she pointed out. "I saw your reaction when the hybrids arrived at the palace. You had no idea. He lies to you and orders you around. And you remain by his side?" Darrow was about to answer but closed his mouth when a familiar figure approached Nell and Axel. He nodded his understanding then. "You gave her to Nikolai," he concluded. Nikolai's large frame made him recognizable from a distance, where he came walking between the high-rises, hailing his family. Nell looked up from her notebook and waved. "Of course I did. I trust him with my life. So did you once." They watched the little family chatting and laughing together, while Nell showed her father what they'd been doing. "You killed Kamra," Nadia finally said. She had just threatened to kill Darrow, but unless he gave her a reason to, she'd rather not. She was desperate and high-strung from standing so close to the monsters he hid inside. "It's not like you can go back." Darrow smiled, a resigned smile. "You think killing my enemy is showing weakness in the eyes of Kassemyr. He likely wanted us pinned against each other to end our animosity, to leave the strongest at his side." "Darrow," she warned, "you lied to me, hid her from me, you and my mother. Kassemyr is the only one who hasn't treated me like a monster." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the photos he'd taken from his mother's shop and let them fall to the ground. "If not for my mother's sentimentality, I'd have no clue when it comes to that child's whereabouts. I am warning you, Darrow, if you try—" "Stop it, Nadia. Stop threatening me. You know you can't stop me, and stop trying to manipulate me. My mind is not as fractured as everyone likes to say." He turned fully away from Nell then, and looked out onto the street where a few cars and a blue tram passed by. "You have no right to ask anything of me. Kassemyr does. At least he sees value in what I am when everyone else sees a beast that must be killed." "Darrow?" she began, but didn't get any further. Darrow turned the corner and ran away from her family, perhaps seeing a tiny piece of reason. Nadia turned back to find Nikolai staring right at her. With his half-werewolf senses, he must have heard something. His face emanated silent questions, and fear for the two who were blissfully unaware and gathering up their supplies from the ground. Slowly, Nikolai raised his hand, thumb out and pointing down. It was what they had feared all these years. Darrow had found them. Nadia nodded solemnly and then gave him the sign that she'd call him. She was armed and carried gashes from the altercations and fights that day. This was not the time to approach and scare Nell. Knowing that Nikolai would take Axel and Nell away to a safe place Nadia didn't even know about, she picked up the photos and walked away herself. She headed for her preferred gateway by the ruins that would take her to Agartha, and back to the continued rule of Kassemyr with a broken soul by his terrorizing and bloodthirsty side. Not a drop of blood had been shed between her and Darrow, and yet she felt like she'd been in battle, her mind reeling, her body weary. She needed a safe place within the chaos that was Agartha. Chapter 15. The door looked innocuous enough, and Nadia reached for it to knock, but the moment her knuckles made contact with the wood, the whole door blazed in a yellow shimmer. She quickly withdrew her hand by reflex, and then noticed the message, which was spelled out in the light and among the floating sigils. "Why don't you try to open the door?" Nadia narrowed her eyes, but that was indeed what it said. A warning? An invitation? The magical force faded and would no doubt return should she touch the door again. Carefully and ready to jump back should some magic shoot from the door and hit her in the face, did she reach for the doorknob to try it. Her hand closed around it, and the magic returned, but it only spread from the knob and into her hand before she could do anything. It didn't hurt. It faded anew, and she turned the thing, opening the door with a soft click. For the first time that day, Nadia smiled a radiant smile. Harmiston had set up a safeguard that could identify both friends and enemies. She had to give it to him. It was an excellent system to allow some sleep without someone keeping watch. Nadia entered the apartment behind the door and closed it with care. She touched the door again with her fingertip just to check, and the message flared up once more. Satisfied that the alarm was still functioning, she turned around and took in the place. In the dark, despite her excellent night vision, it was a more subdued home, the finer details of Harmiston's life not easily spotted. She could hear him breathing in the bedroom. The door was closed, and his breaths came slowly and evenly. He was fast asleep, and she let him stay that way. Despite the dark outside, the cube dominated the view from the living room window, and she walked over, making no sound on her way. The little Anemoy newt was still hard at work, protecting her all the way from the shade, through the tunnel into the farmlands, and then back into the city and Harmiston's apartment. The cube loomed in the darkness, even with most of the lights in there turned off. Some were on, but she didn't know if it was because they'd been that way since the day of the attack, or if some of Kassemyr's followers were in there, keeping an eye on things. It was likely a bit of both, she assumed. The cube was too important as part of ruling the city to leave open to anyone. It was a symbol of the queen's power outside of the palace, especially regarding her control over the shade and thereby the border. It had also been Nadia's home for so long, she hardly remembered any other way of living. Now, she was rootless and on the run from Kassemyr and Darrow. The latter had made it clear that they were enemies and, with the day's discovery, he had only gotten even angrier with her. She would never regret that. It had come from her efforts to protect and provide for her daughter. Darrow's hate was worth that price. She remained next to the window, just out of sight should anyone below in the street or inside the cube happen to look the other way. Then she inhaled deeply and closed her eyes for a moment. A lot had happened since 20 ghosts returned from their reconnaissance mission with the news of the magical bomb. There was little to be done with all of it at the moment, though, so Nadia focused on the things she could control. She'd been running and fighting for hours and needed a break. Without waking the sleeping chronicler-turned-mage, she went into his bathroom and used the shower, washing off the dirt and relaxing her sore muscles under the warm spray. She put the amulet back on afterward and snuck into Harmiston's bedroom, where she borrowed some clothes to sleep in from his closet. Then she returned to the living room and lay on the couch, fitting snugly under a blanket, a soft cushion under her head. But there, in the quiet dark, finally safe and alone with her thoughts, memories of Nilofar flooded her mind. Memories of a safe haven for a pair of frightened children who'd lost their mother. Memories of a warm home with love, rules, and everything else they needed. Of a no-nonsense attitude and a sharp wit. Of an unquestionable love and loyalty to her family. Nilofar had not deserved her fate, and she would have hated that her photos had revealed where Nell lived. But she would have been grateful to know that her granddaughter was safe despite that. Nadia pulled the blanket up to her neck and curled up. For a rare moment in her life, she shed tears. They were for one of the most important people in her life, for her family. The sun was up, lighting the room, when a warm hand brushed against her cheek, stroking away a few stray strands of her hair. I don't ever think I've seen a wraith, or a ghost for that matter, sleep before. I didn't know you did that." Nadia opened her eyes and looked at Harmiston, who'd hunkered down next to the couch. He winked. "We even take naps." "I don't believe you," he said with a smile. "Power naps." "Of course you do. They have to be efficient naps to be worth even considering, right?" Nadia smiled and sat up. The blanket slipped off her in the process. Harmiston picked it up and sat beside her. "Is she safe then? Nilofar?" Nadia drew a deep breath, steeling herself, and told him what happened after she left him and the ghosts in the tunnels. Harmiston listened with a comforting silence until she finished about 3 minutes later. "I'm so sorry, Nadia. It saddens me to hear that. But your girl, then? Is she safe?" Nadia nodded. "For now." "Good. Then I suggest we get some food in you, and then you add some details to that story while we eat." He arose and reached out to her. Nadia had never needed help to get up from a seated position in her life, but that wasn't what this was about. He was offering consolation, and she took it by taking his hand and following him to the kitchen, where he began rummaging through cabinets and the fridge. "It's been over a week since I was last here, and most of the vegetables and other things have gone bad, but I'm sure we can make something edible. I'm glad you figured I meant this place when I said a safe place, by the way." Nadia bent and looked at the photos on his fridge while he bustled around. "It's the only other place we've been to outside the cube that's private. I was pretty sure you didn't mean the public cafe 3 streets over." "Well, no one knows I'm here, especially since I'm not someone the hybrids are concerned about." He began stirring things together in a bowl while heating a frying pan on the stove. "I take it you all got out of the tunnels unscathed, then?" "Oh yes. There was one very scathed vampire out in the palace garden, but none of us. Those ghosts are ruthless. I know. I wouldn't have trusted them with your safety if not." "I can take care of myself, you know," he said, and wriggled his eyebrows. "Yes, you can. I know that now, but you are not unbeatable, Harm. Trust me. The Wraiths have gone up against a mage or two, and the Wraiths lived to tell the tales." She glanced through the kitchen window at the dark facade of the cube. "Well, they did then, at any rate," she added mournfully. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. "I take it the other ghosts aren't anywhere near here." She looked away from the cube and pushed back hurtful memories. "No. When we were safely outside, they said we were going back to the shade, to Fallen Oaks. But I told you I'd wait here." "It can't have made them happy knowing you meant that." "I wouldn't know. Ghosts show emotions at the same rate as wraiths." He shrugged. "But I froze them again and took off. They were in a safe area. They should be back in Fallen Oaks now. It wasn't like they could track me since I was hidden with both my spell and the bland asphodel, and had a head start." "What?" Harmiston turned around, a spatula in one hand, a stripe of flour on his cheek. "You used to be crafty, Harm. In a theoretical sense, now you're crafty out in the physical world, too." "Thanks?" She nodded. "Yes, thanks." "All right, then." He grinned and turned back to the stove. "How about you tell me what happened last night? With more detail than Darrow killed Kassemyr, or the hybrids were all dead. Those are all significant happenings that aren't easily accomplished. We need to know how the enemy operates, right?" "You're right." She sat on one of the chairs and began her story anew, taking time to answer questions when he had them. Despite the various decaying foods in the kitchen, Harmiston made pancakes with different kinds of jam and black coffee. Nadia rarely had so much sugar, but she ate heartily, having had no sustenance in hours. It was delicious, and for a few moments, the world outside felt far off, despite her tale of the darker sides of it. They ate and talked and spent some time after that on the couch, catching up on the latest news by going through Harmiston's mail which had accumulated in his absence. The newspapers had been shut down a few days after Kassemyr took over, but a few were back in business now, and it was, as Harmiston said, all about what was mentioned between the lines these days. The Agarthans were not happy with the new regime. "What's next for us, then?" Harmiston asked a few hours later, while they were drinking each their cup of tea. Nadia hadn't, despite recent aches and a few bruises, felt so relaxed in a long time. She wasn't sure she ever had. "We?" "I think that's obvious by now, don't you?" He looked so sincere at that. There was no humorous smile or any shyness about him, only the simple truth. Nadia smiled and put her half-full cup on the table before turning to face him on the couch. "Yes, you're right. You've had my back all this time, Harm. You helped me when I needed to go save someone. No one else did. No one other than Victoria and my brother would have. I've spent my life trusting and relying on people who would, in certain cases, stop me. But that's not you." "It was the right thing to do," he said with complete honesty. "Simple as that. Yes, I'm enough of a ghost and have been a wraith long enough to know that despite tough choices in life, sometimes it truly is as simple as that. Thank you for what you did." "You're welcome." He smiled then, his voice warm and friendly. "But I'm sorry I made things difficult between us. We had a good thing going for a short while there." "We did," she said. "I understand it now, Harm. You wanted a life without restraints you had done nothing to deserve. To not be punished for the misdeeds of others. I have lived a life of restraints, and I sought them out freely. I took pride in the skills the wraiths gave me, and the honor I lived by. It took me some time to see your side of it." "Well, there are no simple answers, I guess. What's right for one person isn't necessarily so for another. That doesn't make either right or wrong." "I agree," she said, and leaned her elbow on top of the backrest. "As for what to do now," she pressed her lips together a moment. "Go back to Fallen Oaks, I guess." "You want that?" There was a touch of hope in his voice. "Agartha is my home. And I'm still a ghost, I think. I have a duty to help if I can, and I both feel obligated to and I want to." Harmiston cracked a genuinely happy smile then. "Good, because I still have the specs for the bomb." Nadia sat up. "You do? What about Carrie and the others?" "I didn't give it to them," Harmiston said with a look of both confusion and affront. "They don't know how to read them." He got up from the couch and fetched his satchel from a nearby side table. He had half the papers out before he sat back down. "Look here, I went through some of them last night. I'm sure we can replicate this. We just need to find a way to alter the substances and—" "Harm." She broke him off and put a hand on his cheek, turning his head so he faced her. "Yes? You are a treasure. You know that?" "Usually people say chatterbox, humph." Nadia leaned in and kissed him to silence. For a moment, he only responded against her lips. Then his breath hitched and she heard the papers slide to the floor as they moved closer to each other, embracing. In that moment, she couldn't understand how she could have pushed him away. She'd missed this. His warm and soft lips against hers, running her hand through his short hair. His hand entwined in hers. She never wanted to keep any kind of distance from him again. She'd been a fool to do so all this time. She drew back a little, slightly out of breath, and smiled at him. The warm and genuine smile of anyone in love. "Let's forget about those specs for a while, huh?" she said, and stood, already missing the feel of his arms around her. This time, she reached out to him, and he took her hand and followed her. "You're thinking so hard it woke me up," Harmiston said a while later. The sun was setting outside, and Nadia lay in bed, comfortable and relaxed on her side, with his warm body spooning hers, one arm over her. He shifted a little, forcing the sleep from his body. He pulled her closer and kissed her neck, just below her ear. She smiled contentedly and stroked her fingers lazily back and forth over his forearm. "I've been thinking. About me, I hope." She chuckled softly. "What is happening?" he asked, sounding genuinely surprised at her reaction. "About what you said, Harm." "I said something? I can't remember anything that happened before we came in here." Nadia turned over on her back and smiled at him. Under the covers, with their heads so close on one pillow, she didn't want to leave. It was the safest she'd felt in a long time. "About how just because we choose different ways to live, it doesn't mean that only one way is the right one." He nodded and raised his hand, stroking his fingers through her hair. "I have spent my life either hiding things or wanting to be part of something bigger than myself. None of those are bad, especially since that first part was about protecting your daughter. I know, but I think, for the first time in my life, that it's time for me to want things for myself in addition to all of that." "That sounds like a good outlook if ever I heard one." Harmiston leaned in and kissed her then. "So, that means that we're going back to Fallen Oaks?" he asked when he pulled back. "Or do you want something else?" "No, we're going back. You want that too, right?" He nodded. "But before then, would you like to tell me about Nilafar? She sounds like an extraordinary person." Nadia pressed her lips together before she rolled over on her side, facing him and pulling him into a tight embrace. Chapter 16. The ghosts surrounded them the moment they stepped out from the woods and onto the open field outside the old Fallen Oaks school. "Halt, Sentinel," one of them said. Nadia and Harmiston did as told. She eyed them, all 10 of them. None of them had drawn their swords, but a few kept their hands on the hilts. This told her that neither she nor Harmiston were banned or considered enemies, but they would be under heavy scrutiny. They'd made sure to be spotted by one of the guards on the outer perimeter, and the fact that blue-clad ghosts met them instead of the ones in disguises meant they had also been expected to show up. "Sentinel Tayley," one of them said. "Run and alert Phantom Marika." The ghost did as ordered. Nadia smiled a tight-lipped smile and nodded at Harmiston, who sighed. "Wish I could freeze them now." "Don't worry," Nadia told him. "This won't last long." She indicated the school to Harmiston with a sideways nod, and they walked there, escorted by the ghosts. 5 minutes later, they reached the Queen's office without incident. They knew the messenger had reached her first, no matter where in the building she was, and that she'd retreated to her office with her closest advisors to await them. They met Marika in the outer office with the Sentinel, on her way to fetch them, no doubt. "Sentinel Nadia?" she said, a hint of surprise in her neutral voice. "We're here to report back, Phantom." Marika frowned. "What's going on? Whatever it is, we can talk about it in here," Queen Isona said from the doorway to her office. "Ma'am," Marika said, "that might not be a good idea." "Nonsense." The older woman waved them over. "After all I've heard so far, I'd truly like to hear her side of it too." Marika eyed Nadia, but then gave the Queen a curt nod and stepped aside. The other sentinels remained outside, but Marika followed them into the office where the Queen and her advisors, just like Nadia predicted, had gathered. This time, they were not sent away, but then again, Nadia had nothing to hide anymore. "Are you willing to tell us your side of it? We have some disgruntled ghosts reporting of order-defying behavior." Nadia nodded and got to it. When she was done, Isona, who'd sat leaning back in her chair through the whole recounting of events, leaned forward. "So your secret is out then, since you're telling it so willingly now," she said, referring to Darrow finding out about Nell. "Is she safe?" "Pardon?" "Your little girl? Is she safe from him?" Nadia nodded, unsure of how this act of empathy fit in here. But then, the Queen was a mother herself. She understood the importance, regardless of the raging world around them. "What do you wish to accomplish by coming back here?" Isona continued. "Both of you," she asked them point blank. "I don't want to be held back anymore," Nadia began. "I am too closely connected to Darrow and know more about Kassemyr than any of you. I want to be of proper use. All I ask is that you don't stop me from doing that anymore. I may be a new ghost, but I was a wraith for years, a shadow wraith for many of them. Don't discount that by treating me like a bolt or a cutter. And you, chronicler, I realize I don't really know what to call you. How about Harmiston, ma'am? I want the same as her. To be able to help without all these rigid rules. I have the specs for the magical bomb they used against us. Let me see what I can do with them." The Queen shared a look with Marika while she considered. Her advisors kept quiet. Isona sighed and focused on Nadia and Harmiston again. "I know Marika here is quite undecided on this whole issue. If a ghost defies an order, it calls for sanctions, not banishment, at least the first time. But then, we are in a time of war. Rules are different then. We need to trust each other. I, on the other hand, need all the help I can get." She looked at Harmiston and offered a restrained smile. "I accept your willingness to share those specs." He hadn't offered that at all, but she beat him to his oncoming response. "And I accept your offer to work on them to see if we can be aided by them." She focused on Nadia before Harmiston could agree to anything. She had been in the queening business a while, after all. "As for you, Sentinel," she said, thereby confirming Nadia's continued status as such, "I have a job for you." "A job?" Nadia looked to Marika, but found no help there. Thankfully, there was no sign of animosity either. The Queen was overruling her here. "A job that won't hold you back in any way, former Shadow Wraith." The Queen's gaze briefly met the spymaster's, telling Nadia they'd been discussing this at some point in the last few days. "I said we are in a war," Isona explained. "The battlefield is a strange one, our city, and I am lacking most of my soldiers. What I want from you, Sentinel Nadia, is to bring me back my wraiths." This has been Queen's Ghost. Book 5 in the Queen's Wraith series. Written by G.K. Lund. Copyright 2022 by G.K. Lund. Audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.